Chapter 1174, Being Nosy. Chapter 1174. Being Nosy. Huh. Why did Sister Shui suddenly disappear last night? Hu Feiyun asked with a strange expression the next morning. Shui Yenyu was eating at that moment, and she instantly started to cough upon hearing this. She then glared at Ling Han with fury. It was all his fault. He had called her over in the middle of the night to do those shameful things. Ling Han smiled and said, "Children shouldn't ask too many questions. Concentrate on eating your breakfast." Hu Feiyun puffed her cheeks. Why did they all treat her like a child? Big Sister did so, and Ling Han was also doing so right now. This made her very angry. After breakfast, they continued on their way. This place didn't only contain eerie things like the misty soul, capturing flower, and saintly scarabs, but also contained all kinds of godly medicine and treasures. If this weren't the case, the misty soul, capturing flower wouldn't have attracted so many people in the first place. The reason it had attracted so many people was because everyone thought it was a kind of godly medicine. They discovered several godly medicines as they walked, yet it was a pity that they had come too late and the godly medicines had already been plucked. Some people had been rough, and they even destroyed the roots of the godly medicines when they plucked them away. However, some people had been relatively careful, and they took care to leave the roots intact when they plucked the godly medicines. This way, they could return to pluck the godly medicines again after 1 century, 2 centuries, or even more centuries. Ling Han didn't beat around the bush, and he dug up all the roots that he saw and tossed them into the Black Tower. The effects of these godly medicines would be maximized if they were placed in the Black Tower. The smile on Ling Han's face grew wider and wider. His harvest was truly bountiful. If he could reap such a yield every day, this trip would already be worth it. However, his luck was fluctuating. In some days he would come across 7 or 8 godly medicines, while on other days he would come across absolutely nothing. 7 days passed by in the blink of an eye. Ding, 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 ding. The sound of clashing weapons traveled over from the distance. In fact, they could even see bursts of divine light soaring into the sky. It was clear that an intense battle was raging in the distance. Hu Feiyun's interest was piqued, and she said, "Let's check it out." Shui Yenyu, who wasn't as curious as Hu Feiyun, said, "It's best that we keep our noses out of other people's matters." However, Hu Feiyun was already running toward the location of the battle, an excited expression on her face. They hadn't experienced any battles during the past 7 days, and thus the 9th king, who was extremely lively, was already barely able to contain herself. Ling Han and Shui Yenyu exchanged a glance. They had no choice but to run after Hu Feiyun. However, they weren't afraid either, as Sun Moon tier elites weren't able to enter this mystery realm. Ling Han was almost invincible, so at least they didn't need to worry about their safety. There was a field of scattered rocks before them, and after passing through it, the 2 battling parties appeared in their vision. One group had 7 people, and the other group was even larger, with 25 people. The larger group had formed an encirclement and trapped the group of 7 inside. "Hand the 9-layer divine lotus over, and we can spare your lives," a member of the encircling group said. Bulsh *T. There was a seductive red-haired beauty among the trapped group of 7, and she was dressed in a particularly revealing manner. She was wearing a shoulderless upper armor that left her jade-like arms revealed, and in fact, even a portion of her voluptuous breasts could still be seen. Her lower armor only reached halfway down her thighs as well, and her long and slender legs were clear for all to see. However, her skin wasn't white, but rather a tanned wheat color. An astonishing vitality radiated from her body, and she seemed much like a female leopard. She humphed and continued, "You guys haven't attempted to kill us only because you're afraid that we'll destroy the 9-layer divine lotus. However, you'll definitely kill us once we hand it over." Ha 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 ha. The encircling group roared with laughter. "There's no need to worry, Leader Meng. The others will die, but you definitely won't. Another person chuckled lewdly and said, I've heard about Leader Meng's beauty for a long time. Won't it be a massive waste if we can't taste Leader Meng's body? Hee hee. Ha ha ha. The members of the encircling group all laughed wantonly. This mystery realm was huge, so it was almost impossible for others to discover their depraved acts. Even if someone did, they could simply kill them along with the victims. How detestable! Hu Feiyun couldn't watch on, and she drew her sword as she charged out, shouting, Evil villains, eat my sword! The encircling group faltered slightly upon seeing her charge out by herself. After a moment, however, they all broke into laughter. She was just a young lady, so wasn't she charging into a lion's den? It's another beautiful woman. Just what we needed. There's only one Leader Meng, so how long would we have needed to line up for? Even if 3 of us do her at the same time, we'll still need to wait for 7 rounds. Now that there's another beautiful woman, we'll only need to wait for 3 rounds. Huh. Look over there, boss. There's another stunning beauty. Their gazes turned to Shui Yenyu, and they couldn't help but drool in excitement. This woman was even more beautiful than the other 2. Moreover, her seductive nature was one that could suck one's soul. They would be willing to sacrifice 100 years of their life just to do this stunning beauty once. Ayo! They all howled in lustful excitement. Hey, you guys are dreaming. Ling Han arrived before them in a flash and calmly said, I can spare your lives if you guys fuck off by yourselves. Ling Han wasn't a bloodthirsty person, and he didn't know what had happened between these 2 groups of people, either. Thus, he didn't want to massacre them. A sturdy man who was around 30 years old walked over and said, Brat, you're quite arrogant, aren't you? His clothes were unbuttoned, revealing his large and round belly. His face was full of pudgy flesh, and he was currently holding a large saber. Strong killing intent radiated from his body. Thanks for your help, handsome guy. However, these people aren't easy to deal with. It's best that you take this chance to escape. The red-haired beauty shouted. You've already stuck your nose into this matter, so how can you leave now? A member of the encircling group said with a sneer. Ling Han cracked a smile and said, You're nothing but a bunch of weaklings. What are you acting so smug for? You're seeking death. A cold glint flashed across the big-bellied man's eyes, and he seized the opportunity while Ling Han was talking to leap over and slash at him. He used his full strength, and divine light radiated from his saber as divine patterns intertwined in the surrounding air. A frosty aura surged toward Ling Han. Pooh! There was a flash, and the divine demon sword had already appeared and slashed outward, shattering the saber into pieces. The divine demon's sword didn't stop, instead continuing on its trajectory and slashing the big-bellied man into 2. Intestines burst into the air as blood sprayed everywhere. Gasp! Everyone was stunned. They were petrified by the power of his sword. It was far too terrifying. How could the might of his sword be so domineering? Wang. The divine demon sword hovered beside Ling Han. Not a drop of blood on its blade. However, a frightening murderous aura radiated from its body. Following the elevation of its level, the might that radiated from this divine sword was also becoming increasingly devastating. One had to realize that devouring metal could evolve to become divine metal. Even if it hadn't reached that level yet, it was still many times more powerful than ordinary godly metal. The encircling group didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han any longer. One of them solemnly asked, Sir, you are? The members of this group all robbed others for a living, and they had spent some money as well as robbed some others to obtain the jade pendants needed for entering this mystery realm. They had obtained enough jade pendants for 25 members to enter. None of them could be considered a prodigy, yet after countless years of cultivation, all of them had reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier. In their minds, They would be invincible as long as they worked together. However, Ling Han had killed one of them with a single stroke of his sword. This put them on edge, and they finally realized that such kinds of powerful prodigies genuinely existed in the world. The profound might of Ling Han's battle prowess was far beyond their imagination. Chapter 1175 Cooperation. Chapter 1175 Cooperation. Ling Han swept his gaze over the encircling group and said, "You people don't have the right to know my name." "Boss, there's no need to speak nonsense with him. Kill him," one of the evil villains shouted. He seemed extremely haughty. The villain boss hesitated for a moment before retrieving a vial of pills. However, he didn't open the vial, instead saying, "Sir, it's not too late for you to leave now. However, you have to leave these two women." He pointed at Xue Yinyu and Hu Feiyun. Upon seeing the killing intent on Ling Han's face, he immediately raised the vial in his hand and said, "Do you know what these are? These are purple pattern mountain river pills, and they can raise my battle prowess by 3 stars. My cultivation level is already at the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier. After raising my battle prowess by another 3 stars, do you really think you'll be any match for me?" He had spent a fortune on this vial of pills, which only contained 2 pills in total. Thus, he didn't want to use them if he didn't have to. This was his trump card, and it was much more effective as a threat than if he genuinely ingested them. Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle. He truly couldn't hold his laughter back. He shook his head and said, "Say, how ignorant do you have to be to think that raising your battle prowess by 3 stars will make you invincible in the mountain river tier?" "You dare to belittle me!" the villain boss roared in anger. Ling Han raised a hand. Whoa! A formidable aura crushed down, and the villain boss's face instantly became as white as a sheet. He didn't dare to move even a pinky. The pinnacle level of the mountain river tier, how incredibly mighty was this? It was only natural that Ling Han could easily crush someone at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. Moreover, the villain boss was only an ordinary mountain river tier cultivator, and he couldn't even be considered a 1-star genius. The gulf in power between them was like night and day. Ling Han casually extended his hand and grabbed the vial of pills. He then smiled and said, "It'll be a huge waste if you were to ingest these pills. It's better if I sell them for some money. I can probably buy a tail, one of level 4, godly metal for it." The villains were all transfixed with shock. Their boss had actually been defeated with a single move. Although the big-bellied man had been sliced into 2, they could have said that he'd been careless, or that his opponent's sword was far too powerful. However, what excuse did they have now? They trembled uncontrollably as terror gripped at their hearts. Spare me. The villain boss instantly discarded his dignity and started to beg for his life. He was a realist. An eerie killing intent appeared on Ling Han's face, and he said, "Didn't you want me to leave the women?" The villain boss shook his head frantically and stuttered, "And no, I wouldn't dare to." That's because I'm powerful enough. If I had been weaker than you, my women would have become your playthings." Ling Han said calmly. Hu Feiyun raised her hand in protest and said, "Ling Han, I'm not your woman." Ling Han sighed and said, "Can't you see that I'm showing off my brilliant might right now? Did you really have to interrupt me and ruin the atmosphere?" "Oh!" Hu Feiyun nodded weakly as she lowered her head and started to twiddle her fingers. "I'm not a bloodthirsty person, but it's a shame that I can't see any redeeming features in you people. There's no reason for me to be sympathetic." Ling Han raised his right hand, and the divine demon's sword moved along with his actions. The tip of the divine demon sword hovered over the villains' bodies. "We've no option but to fight him." The villains weren't stupid, and they all prepared to battle upon realizing that Ling Han had no intention of letting them off. They would battle to the death. If there were even a sliver of hope, these people would even stoop as low as to pretend to be a subservient lackey. However, if all avenues to life were severed, they would become ferocious madmen who fought to their very last breath. They definitely wouldn't lie down and accept death. They turned their attention away from the red-haired beauty and her group and all charged toward Ling Han. Either Ling Han died or they died. Ling Han smiled coldly as he unclasped a hand. Xiao, xiao, xiao. 24 streaks of divine light shot out. Pu, piu, piu, piu. The heads of the 24 villains instantly exploded. Their deaths were swift and violent. The red-haired beauty and the other 6 members of her group were all stunned, looks of sheer disbelief on their faces as they stared at Ling Han. What kind of freakish battle prowess was this? Weren't Sun Moon tier elites not allowed to enter this mystery realm? However, was Ling Han's battle prowess not at the Sun Moon tier? Those 24 villains were at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier, yet they had been insta-killed just like that? Who could believe this? Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "No need to thank me." He grabbed Shui Yenyu's hand and started to walk off. Hu Feiyun faltered for a moment before hurriedly running after them and shouting, "Wait for me!" Oi, oi. The red-haired beauty also came to her senses, and she immediately sprinted after Ling Han and the others. "Handsome guy, why are you leaving so quickly? Are you scared that I'll bite?" She winked at Ling Han as she said this. Ling Han was slightly astonished. This woman seemed fairly laid back for someone who had almost been killed just then. In fact, she was even in high enough spirits to wink at him. "Are you okay?" Shui Yenyu asked. "Sigh." The red-haired beauty sighed before saying, "Our losses were truly great this time." She immediately started to recount the events, not caring whether Ling Han and the others were interested. As it turned out, they were a mercenary group that accepted money to complete missions. However, they weren't hired for a job this time and had instead paid a fortune to enter this mystery realm. Their target was a treasure storage that existed inside this mystery realm. They had discovered this treasure storage on a mission to enter with and protect someone. However, many members of their mercenary group had died, and even the person who had hired them lost their life. Even so, they still yearned to enter that treasure storage. Thus, they spent a fortune to enter this mystery realm again. However, they discovered a 9-layer divine lotus on their way, and they only managed to obtain it after sacrificing for members of their group while fighting the demonic beast that guarded it. They were extremely unfortunate, though, and the group of villains had noticed and targeted them. If it weren't for the fact that the villains were afraid of them going all out and even destroying the 9-layer divine lotus, the red-haired beauty and her group definitely wouldn't have survived until Ling Han and the others came. "Handsome guy, you're so powerful. Why don't we team up and cooperate?" The red-haired beauty invited them to work together. "Oh, that's right, my name is Wei Mengwei." "Are we really teaming up to find treasures?" Ling Han grumbled in his mind. "It looks like you want to gobble me up." "How does 50 to 50 sound?" Meng Wei was extremely enthusiastic, and she continued, "Although you're strong, we're the ones who are providing the location of the treasure storage. So, splitting the treasures 50 to 50 isn't too greedy on our part, right?" Ling Han sighed and said, "I still haven't accepted your invitation yet." Meng Wei laughed loudly and said, "It's okay, I'm sure you'll accept my invitation after considering it for a while." She didn't seem to mind that her breasts were undulating as she laughed. It was almost as if her breasts were about to jump out from her armor. Ling Han's expression became serious, and he asked, "What treasure storage is this? Do you mind telling me?" Meng Wei's expression was as if she expected this answer. That place was probably the abode of an alchemist, so there are heaps of alchemical pills. Perhaps there are even some pill recipes. If we make copies of the pill recipes, we'll definitely make huge fortunes selling them. Ling Han's eyes lit up. He was absorbed by the word alchemist. He nodded and said, "Fine, let's work together. We'll split the alchemical pills evenly, and we'll each make a copy of any pill recipe we find." "Deal." Meng Wei extended her hand. Ling Han slapped her hand lightly, and the two of them sealed their deal. They set off toward the abode of the alchemist. However, they decided to rest when night fell, so that they could recover their energy. The red-haired beauty and her group had just experienced an intense battle after all. Chapter 1176. Mind if I sleep with you? Chapter 1176. Mind if I sleep with you? After convincing Hu Feiyun to leave, Ling Han wrapped his arms around Shui Yinyu and prepared to get some rest. There were outsiders nearby, after all, so it would be a bad idea to enter the Black Tower and risk exposing the secret of his spatial god tool. With a swoosh, Meng Wei entered their tent as she pulled the entrance aside. She was wearing a bright red cloak, and it was evident that she had only just washed her hair. There were still beads of water dripping down her silky red hair, radiating a peculiar type of allure. "Leader Meng, it's already so late. For what reason do you come?" Ling Han asked. There was slight irritation in his voice. Meng Wei had come without invitation, and she hadn't even asked before entering. She was acting far too familiar. You can't do as you please, even if you're a woman, and even if you're a beauty. Guys, mind if I sleep with you? Meng Wei asked them a shocking question. Pooh! Ling Han instantly spluttered aloud. Thankfully, he and Shui Yinyu had been together this entire time. Otherwise, she would have definitely interrogated him on his relationship with Meng Wei. Shui Yinyu was also astonished, and she asked, "Sister Meng, are you drunk?" There was a puzzled look on Meng Wei's face, and she said, "Why are you two so surprised? Have you two not made love before?" Was this woman trying to shock them to death? Shui Yinyu was extremely embarrassed, and she buried her head into Ling Han's back, not daring to look at anyone else. Ling Han was naturally thick-skinned enough, and he said, "Leader Meng, what are you trying to say?" "I battled for an entire day, and several of my good comrades died. I'm feeling extremely down right now, so I want to let myself loose." There was an alluring look in Meng Wei's eyes as she gazed at Ling Han, and she continued, "Don't think that I'm casual about my partners. Although I won't guard my chastity as if it's pure jade, I'll only make love with men that I truly think are worthy. Is this not casual?" Shui Yinyu was already completely dumbfounded. This woman was far too bold. "Your expressions are so strange. Do you think that women get the short end of the stick when they fuck men?" Meng Wei chuckled in scorn and said, "It's fine as long as I feel good. It's not like I'll get pregnant or anything, and we can both go our own ways after rooting. Neither of us will owe each other anything." This made some sense. However, in this world where beautiful women were often treated as a commodity, people still held onto the traditional belief that men would definitely be better off when making love with women. Women would definitely get the short end of the stick. Ling Han wouldn't interfere with others' habits as long as they didn't affect him. "Leader Meng, I think it'll be better if you seek your own comrades to let yourself loose." "Tisk, rabbits don't eat the grass by their burrows." Meng Wei waved her hand and said, "When I screw a man, we'll only be together for a maximum of 10 days to half a month. We'll never see each other again after that. So, how can I screw my own comrades? How will I leave them by my side after I screw them?" Ling Han grimaced upon hearing this. This was the first time he had come across such a woman, and he was truly at a loss for words. "I want to see my wares," Meng Wei asked. She undid her cloak and slipped out of it, revealing her beautiful and seductive naked body. Large breasts, flat stomach, shapely bottom, and long and slender legs. This was truly a flawless and alluring body. However, there were many scars on her body, and it was clear that some had been left numerous years ago. They hadn't disappeared over time. These scars had formed due to the foreign martial intents that had remained in her wounds while they healed. Because of their existence, her wounds hadn't been able to heal completely. Ling Han was astonished that there were so many scars on the body of a stunning beauty such as Meng Wei. It was quite a startling scene. Meng Wei proudly puffed her chest and confidently said, "How is it? My figure is quite nice, isn't it?" Ling Han waved his hands and said, "I'm sorry, but I don't have a habit of getting together with my cooperation partners." He wasn't faking seriousness. In fact, he was genuinely uninterested in having one-night stands. Ling Han had never seen himself as someone who was loyal to only one partner, but he wouldn't make love with someone just for the sake of short-term pleasure. "Then I can only concede and take the next best option." Meng Wei turned her gaze to Shui Yenyu and said, "Girl, I'll teach you how to make love with women. Believe me, my techniques are definitely no worse than your man's. I guarantee that you'll experience an incredible pleasure." "Fuck, you're even trying to steal my woman." Ling Han was extremely ticked off, and he immediately walked over and grabbed Meng Wei by the neck. "Oi, oi, oi, I only accept normal lovemaking. You're being too rough, and I don't like that. Ow." Meng Wei shouted loudly as she was thrown out of the tent by Ling Han. She plopped to the ground on her rear. "Ha ha ha. Leader, you were rejected, huh?" "I said so, didn't I? He has 2 breathtakingly beautiful wives. So how could he possibly have been seduced by our leader? However, he rejected a threesome that was delivered to his door. It looks like young Master Han's standards are pretty high, huh?" Meng Wei's subordinates all roared with laughter. It was evident that they were all well aware of their leader's bad habits. "What do you guys mean? Are you trying to say that I'm not classy enough?" Meng Wei slipped back into her cloak and continued to speak without restraint. Her subordinates all giggled in secret. They had gone through thick and thin with Meng Wei, so it could be said that they were like true brothers and sisters. Thus, they naturally didn't fear her too much, nor did they overly respect her. However, they were all willing to die for her. At least half of the scars on her body had been left during the times that she had saved them. She continued to curse and vent her emotions. Her desire hadn't been satisfied, so she was naturally very unhappy. After cursing for a while, she shouted, "I'll deal with it myself." She then immediately returned to her own tent. Shui Yenyu's face flushed red, and she buried it in Ling Han's lap, murmuring, "How can there be such people?" Ling Han laughed loudly and said, "Would you still say this if Meng Wei were a man?" Shui Yenyu pondered for a moment before replying, "Although that would still seem a little too casual, I guess it wouldn't be overly astonishing." Ling Han nodded and said, "Indeed. Why is such behavior regarded as normal for men? Yet women are criticized for doing the same thing." Shui Yenyu's views naturally couldn't be changed so quickly. She simply shook her head and said, "Anyhow, I can't accept such behavior. Of course, you already have a flawless husband in me, so how can you seek out other men?" Ling Han smiled as he pulled her into his embrace and enjoyed her beauty and warmth. Pay. This man really couldn't say anything nice. Morning arrived, and they continued toward the alchemist's abode. Although they had experienced that awkward situation last night, it didn't seem like Meng Wei had taken it to heart. Sure enough, she was extremely thick-skinned. If this hadn't been the case, she wouldn't have run before an unfamiliar male, stripped naked, and asked to make love anyway. Meng Wei wasn't embarrassed, yet Shui Yenyu's face flushed red every time she saw her. She was teased incessantly by that open and casual woman. They ventured further and further from the Yellow Spring. After walking for several more days, a small manor appeared before them. "Be careful," Meng Wei warned. "We came across a pack of demonic beasts the last time we came here, and we were forced to abandon our armor and retreat. In the end, we only managed to explore a very small area." Ling Han was slightly puzzled and asked, "How do you know there are pills in here if you weren't able to explore its depths last time?" Chapter 1177 Battling a Streak of Tigers. Chapter 1177 Battling a Streak of Tigers. He. A smug grin appeared on Meng Wei's face, and she said, "I've practiced a peculiar cultivation technique, and it allows me to release a wisp of my divine sense. This divine sense can roam freely within a certain range, and it's impossible for normal restrictions to stop it. Ling Han couldn't help but take another glance at her. This cultivation technique seemed fairly useful. One could explore an unknown area without putting themselves in any danger. "Can you check out the current situation then?" he asked. Meng Wei nodded and then closed her eyes. It was as if she had become a stone statue. Ling Han could sense that something had exited Meng Wei's body. It was invisible and shapeless, so one naturally couldn't see or touch it. It could only be detected with one's divine sense. However, one had to be extremely close if they wanted to detect it. If they were slightly further, they wouldn't be able to detect anything. After a long while, Meng Wei suddenly opened her eyes and said, "Just as I expected, those demonic beasts are still inside. I wounded the eyes of one of them, and I can still remember that battle extremely vividly." "What cultivation level are they at?" Ling Han asked. "Most of them are at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and only a few of them are still at the high extreme," Meng Wei replied. She then patted Ling Han's shoulder and said, "In the past, our only option would have been to run. However, now that you're here, go. Exterminate those demonic beasts." Ling Han shook his head and said, "Are you treating me as your underling?" He would naturally be unafraid if the demonic beasts were only at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. However, he was afraid that there would be some at the sun-moon tier. If that were the case, his only option would be to flee. However, there was potentially the inheritance of an alchemist here, so it was worth taking the risk. Pum! He launched a kick and sent the gate of the manor flying. Then he immediately barged in. He arrived in a garden, though this garden was already abandoned and derelict. 3 demonic beasts were lying on the ground and resting. They looked like tigers, yet they all had a silver horn on their foreheads. The 3 demonic beasts crawled up upon hearing the commotion. "Another person has come. Haha, we finally have something to eat." The life essence of cultivators is extremely nutritious. Perhaps our cultivation level will go up if we eat a human. That's impossible, unless you eat a sun-moon tier human. However, they'll be good for a snack. I haven't eaten human flesh for so long. Oh, how I yearn for some. The 3 demonic beasts proceeded to chatter with each other. They had reached the immortal level, so they could naturally communicate in human tongue. In fact, they could even shape-shift into human form if they wanted to. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "I also yearn for some demonic beast meat. I haven't tasted it in ages. What a cocky human! Kill him!" The 3 demonic beasts roared loudly as they charged toward Ling Han. These were 3 demonic beasts which were all at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, and their battle prowess was relatively astonishing. Moreover, demonic beasts had an inherent advantage over human cultivators, and it was normal for them to possess a battle prowess that was 1 star above their cultivation level. "Xiao, xiao, xiao!" The 3 demonic beasts lunged over, and it was as if their large figures were blotting out heaven and earth. Ling Han shook his head and casually extended a finger. "Pa, pa, pa!" 3 streaks of sword light burst out, slicing the demonic beasts into 2. They couldn't be more dead. Meng Wei and her group of mercenaries were already mentally prepared for this, as they had seen Ling Han insta-kill the 24 villains who were at the consummate level before. However, they were still shocked upon seeing him dismember the 3 powerful demonic beasts with a single finger. Heavens! Mountain river tier cultivators can actually be this powerful, as expected of a disciple from the majestic heaven sect. Ling Han walked over and casually placed the corpses of the 3 demonic beasts into his black tower. The bodies of high-grade demonic beasts were full of treasures, and their spiritual meat was more so extremely nutritious. In fact, they were tremendously beneficial to cultivators who practiced body arts. Roar! More demonic beasts surged out from the manor, and upon discovering the pools of blood on the ground and realizing that their companions were missing, they all became wild with rage. A horned tiger stepped forward and said, "Human, where are our companions?" "They wanted to eat me, yet they ended up being slaughtered by me," Ling Han said with a chuckle. The demonic beasts instantly descended into chaotic rage. They all wanted to lunge over and bite Ling Han to death. However, the horned tiger gave a low roar and stopped the other demonic beasts from charging over. It then turned to Ling Han and said, "Human, there's no animosity between us, so why did you come to our territory and kill our companions?" Ling Han smiled and said, "Even I feel a little embarrassed that you're asking this question. This is human territory, so why are you demonic beasts occupying it? Even if we're to hold an interrogation, I should be the one doing the interrogation. So, why on earth are you demonic beasts here?" The horned tiger was at a loss for words. He had only asked that question to put mental pressure on Ling Han. Some humans were mentally weak, and their morale would drop when were questioned in such a manner. In any case, he didn't want to battle against these humans anyway. Their 3 companions had been disposed of so quickly, so it was clear that this human was extraordinarily powerful. It was best that they didn't battle. After reaching their cultivation level, these demonic beasts were already very similar to humans. They all strived for the Tao of heaven and earth. "Big brother, why are you still speaking so much nonsense with him?" another horned tiger asked in disdain. "There are so many of us tigers, so do we really need to be afraid of a mere few humans?" This mystery realm had already opened several times before this, and they had also eaten numerous humans. In their minds, human cultivators were the embodiment of weakness. Thus, they naturally wouldn't respect or fear humans. The leading horned tiger appeared especially hesitant. On the one hand, he didn't dare to underestimate Ling Han and the others. On the other hand, however, his experiences and mindset led him to believe that it was impossible for humans to become overly powerful. His conflicting thoughts made him extremely indecisive. Die. The horned tiger was still mulling over whether to attack or not, yet Meng Wei had already drawn her saber and charged toward them. "Leader." Her subordinates hurriedly followed her charge. If she were to become trapped among the horned tigers, she would definitely be ripped to shreds, even if she was at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. "Haha, it's you," one of the horned tigers said with a cold sneer. There was a scar on the corner of his eye. It had been left by Meng Wei 100 years ago. He had been filled with hate and thirst for vengeance for this entire time. Who would have thought that he would have the opportunity to exact revenge now? He was the first horned tiger to lunge over. The streak of tigers roared upon seeing this, and they all lunged toward Meng Wei and her companions. The leading horned tiger had no option but to roar and charge over. "Kill them! Kill them!" Hu Feiyun shouted as she hid behind Shui Yinyu's back. She liked to spectate battles and excitement, yet she was especially afraid of death. Thus, she would naturally stay back to watch the commotion while egging others on to join the battle. Ling Han shook his head, and it didn't look like he would force her to join the battle. The Rain Emperor and the others needed to improve through battles, yet Hu Feiyun's situation was a bit unique. All she needed to do was raise her cultivation level. Empress Luan Xing's willpower would slowly awaken as she did so, and it would guide her to reach an even higher cultivation level. Thus, she didn't need to participate in battles, as the existence of Empress Luan Xing's willpower meant that she had already experienced this process. Meanwhile, Shui Yenyu seemed very enthusiastic. She drew her sword and charged toward the horned tigers. She didn't want to be a beauty who couldn't help in battle. She also wanted to prove her abilities and worth. Of course, she wasn't stupid either, and she chose the weakest member among the streak of tigers. This horned tiger possessed a similar cultivation level to her, and they immediately became locked in an intense battle. The Azura Demon Emperor was responsible for protecting her. Although his battle prowess was only at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier, Such a battle prowess was almost saintly in this mystery realm. Thus, Ling Han was extremely at ease. However, the Azura Demon Emperor didn't dare to use his power wantonly, as it was possible that he would be targeted by the restrictions in this place. With both Ling Han and the Azura Demon Emperor not participating in the battle, Meng Wei and the others were quickly plunged into a perilous situation. Chapter 1178. Entering the Alchemy Room. Chapter 1178. Entering the Alchemy Room. The leading horned tiger was a little puzzled. He had only suppressed his ferocity and tried to persuade Ling Han and the others to leave because he was apprehensive of their strength. However, judging by the situation right now, these humans had simply come to seek death. There were only 2 people who hadn't joined the battle yet. However, one was a human who was clearly at the mountain river tier. Regardless of how powerful he was, his maximum cultivation level could only be at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. A streak of 10 tigers would be enough to deal with him. Meanwhile, the other person was an asinine puppet. Their influence on this battle would be even more negligible. Was I being too cautious? The horned tiger felt that this was the case. They had killed and eaten countless humans during the past tens of thousands of years, and they had barely come across any hitch. Humans were indeed very weak. He became far more at ease upon thinking of this, and he let out a long roar before shouting, "Brothers, attack!" The dozens of remaining horned tigers roared in reply and instantly charged into battle. Meng Wei and the others were plunged into an even more precarious situation. "Handsome guy, hurry up and help us!" Meng Wei shouted. "Brat, it seems like you're the leader of these people," the leading horned tiger said. He glared at Ling Han and continued, "Very well. I'm the leader of the horned tigers, so let us battle, king to king." "Sure," Ling Han said with a smile. He clenched his right hand into a fist and punched outward. Boom! Origin power surged and regulations fluctuated, forming a devastating beam of light. Pum! A wall was instantly obliterated. However, the power of Ling Han's fist still hadn't completely dissipated yet. Pung, 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 pung. A whopping 11 walls were obliterated. However, this wasn't to say that the power of Ling Han's fist had dissipated. In fact, the might of his fist had already surged out of the manner there were no more walls for it to obliterate. The beam of light quickly became a small dot in the distance. However, it left a trail of destruction in its wake, with the deep pits in the ground revealing its devastating might. The environment in the immortal realm was extremely stable, and it was very difficult for cultivators at the mountain river tier to cause widespread damage. However, Ling Han had already reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier, and his power was more so 8 stars above his cultivation level. Thus, his destructive power was also becoming stronger by the day. The leading horned tiger winced, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. "I missed," Ling Han muttered to himself. He then grinned and said, "What did you say just then? You wanted to battle me, king to king?" "Battle my fucking A***s." The leading horned tiger wanted to cry, "You're just toying with me now." Ling Han's strike had been terrifying, and even if the entire streak of tigers were to defend against it together, it was still extremely likely that they would be insta-killed. He finally came to a realization. These humans are indeed very ordinary except for this man. "Stop the battle! Stop the battle!" he shouted frantically. "It's already too late," Ling Han said. "I can't wait to eat some tiger meat." He flicked his finger and instantly disposed of the leading horned tiger. He had initially wanted to toy with the leading horned tiger for a little longer, but upon thinking of the alchemical pills and pill recipes that might be in the manor, he decided to deal with him as quickly as possible. If he allowed the battle to drag on for too long, who knew what unforeseen circumstances would arise? These horned tigers killed and ate people, so why did he need to show them any mercy? Sword chi swept through the surroundings, and horned tigers, fell to the ground dead wherever Ling Han passed. At the same time, he stored all of their corpses into his black tower. These were his spoils of battle, so of course he didn't need to share them with Meng Wei and the others. This is so easy. Riding on someone's coattail feels so good. Meng Wei and the others exclaimed. They had initially thought that this would be a fierce and dangerous battle. However, it had ended up being extremely simple and relaxed. Meng Wei led them into the depths of the manor. There was a secret room here, and it was protected with restrictions. The restrictions were a lot more complete when we discovered this place 100 years ago, Meng Wei said. 100 years ago was when she had discovered this place using her unique technique and found that it was filled with alchemical pills. That streak of tigers probably resided here in the hopes of opening this secret room as well, Ling Han speculated. After reaching the immortal level, the cultivation path of demonic beasts was almost identical to that of humans. Thus, alchemical pills refined by humans were also useful to demonic beasts. Anyhow, the restriction here is still fairly powerful, Ling Han said as he continued to study it. Although this restriction had already existed for a very long time, it still possessed an extraordinary might. If this hadn't been the case, the large streak of tigers would have been able to crack it a long time ago. Handsome guy, can you crack this restriction? Meng Wei asked. I'll try, Ling Han replied. He didn't make any promises. He walked around the surroundings as he tried to gather a rough understanding of the restriction. He quickly reached a conclusion. With his deduction abilities, he would be able to crack this restriction in around 10 years. This would be an impossible task under normal circumstances. After all, this mystery realm would become extremely dangerous in half a year's time. If outsiders didn't leave, they would all be massacred. Where would he find 10 years? However, Ling Han owned a reincarnation tree. Using the fact that he needed to concentrate on studying the restriction as an excuse, he shooed Meng Wei and the others away. He then ordered the Azura Demon Emperor to guard the secret room. Meanwhile, he entered the Black Tower to complete comprehension under the reincarnation tree. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. 11 days passed, and a confident smile spread across Ling Han's face. He had spent an extra day as he had needed to frequently enter and exit the Black Tower. Observing and studying the restriction consumed a fair amount of time. He called everyone over. Meng Wei appeared quite astonished, and she exclaimed, Handsome guy, you're already able to crack the restriction. Only 11 days had passed. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, I can't help it. I'm a genius after all. Everyone chuckled upon hearing this. Ling Han wasn't exaggerating. Being able to crack this restriction in 11 days was a freakish accomplishment, of course. This was under the condition that he succeeded. Ling Han didn't waste any time speaking. Instead, he continued to move around, making a few striking motions here and another few striking motions there. It looked like he was pretending to be some mystical being. After watching him for a while, Hu Feiyun couldn't help but yawn. She had never been a patient person. An hour passed, and everyone suddenly felt as if a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. However, they couldn't see any visible difference in the surroundings. I've removed the restriction, Ling Han said with a smile. He walked toward the room, and sure enough, he made it to the door without suffering a single attack. He pushed the door of the secret room. It was a stone door, and it made a series of cracking and grinding sounds as it slowly swung inward. Everyone's eyes widened in eager anticipation. The door opened, revealing the pitch black of the room. However, immortals naturally didn't need light to be able to see clearly. They could see the rows of pill cabinets lining the room, all of which were filled with vials of pills. We're rich! We're rich! Meng Wei and the others shouted in delight. Ling Han was the first to enter, and the others all followed behind him. So many high-grade divine pills. This is the bone-grinding pill, and it can increase the toughness of one's bones. "Thee is the 1,000-crane pill, and it can free one from the regulations of heaven and earth for a short while, thereby allowing them to fly. This is the frost pill, and it allows one to become immune to ice and snow element secret techniques for a short period of time." Aya! They were all over the moon as they read the labels on the vials. However, Meng Wei suddenly wailed in anguish when she uncorked one of the vials. "Leader, what's wrong? Leader, are you finally cracking because you couldn't fulfill your desires the other day?" Her underlings all started to tease her. The pills have already turned into dust." There was a look of anguish on Meng Wei's face. Chapter 1179, Berserk Blood Spirit Pill. Chapter 1179, Berserk Blood Spirit Pill. What? Everyone rushed over to look. Sure enough, there was no alchemical pill in the vial. The only thing remaining was a layer of dust on the bottom. No way. This can't be. What about the other pills? They started going through the cabinets and checking the other vials. However, without any exception, all of the pills had turned into dust. They had been sitting here for far too long. They became more and more disappointed with each vial that they checked. In fact, they felt as if their hearts were about to shatter. The pills here were all at least level 5 divine pills, and each of them would have commanded an insane price if auctioned. With the large number of pills in this place, the sum of their worth would have been unfathomable. However, they had barely begun to dream about their riches before they were given a rude awakening. The pills had all disintegrated into dust. How could they not go crazy? Ling Han didn't find this surprising. Time was the greatest enemy of all existence. So what if these were divine pills? They still couldn't escape the test of time. Of course, the higher the level of a pill, the longer it would be able to last. If a pill reached level 10 or above, perhaps it would even develop a spirit and become an intelligent life form. It would then be a so-called pill spirit, a supreme treasure of the world. Once a divine pill gained life, its medicinal effects wouldn't decrease anymore. Instead, it would absorb the essence of heaven and earth and wound up with even stronger medicinal effects. However, a pill had to be level 10 or above in order for it to develop a spirit. Not only that, but it would also need to endure a profound amount of time. Even with these two conditions satisfied, there was still no guarantee that a pill would be able to form a spirit and gain life. Anyhow, who would be willing to refine a divine pill and just let it sit there? Judging by these pills, this alchemist was below level 9, Ling Han murmured to himself. Thus, the pills that he refined are all between level 5 and level 8. However, pill recipes at this level are the most useful to me. I can only refine level 5 divine pills right now, but it won't be long before I break through to the Sun-Moon tier. At that time, even refining level 8 divine pills won't be too difficult. Let's look around. There should be some pill recipes in this room. Sure enough, he found an entire shelf of pill recipes after searching around for a while. Each pill recipe was recorded in a book. However, their age meant that they were extremely frail. In fact, they would turn into dust at the slightest of touches. Thus, Ling Han placed the shelf along with its contents in the Black Tower. That way, they wouldn't be able to crumble even if they wanted to. He immediately made 2 copies of each of the pill recipes. He then retrieved the originals and copies and said, "Leader Meng, according to our earlier agreement, each of us is allowed to make a copy of the pill recipes. I've already made the copies, and the originals are also here. Pick whichever ones you want." "When did you make the copies?" Meng Wei asked. She was still sifting through the vials of alchemical pills, stubbornly trying to find a vial that was fortunate enough to have survived. Just pick," Ling Han said. He obviously wouldn't tell her that he had entered the Black Tower and made the copies in the blink of an eye. Moreover, he had made 2 copies, not 1. Meng Wei carefully compared the 2 versions. After confirming that not a single character was different, she nodded and said, Cooperating with handsome guys indeed gives one peace of mind. Oi, 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 our cooperation is about to end, so why don't we have a one-night stand before we each go our own ways? I've been holding back for so many days, and I'm already itching to go. Beat it, Ling Han said as he put one of the copies away. However, he left the original pill recipes for her. These would disintegrate upon being touched anyway. Meng Wei wore a puzzled expression and murmured, "Have I become less charming? That's impossible. My breasts haven't become smaller, and my waist hasn't become thicker. My bottom is also as shapely as before. So, why can't I win this handsome guy over? Could it be that he doesn't like women?" Gasp. "I can hear you," Ling Han said in an irritated voice. "Leader, leader," someone shouted. Their voice was filled with excitement. "What's wrong?" Meng Wei asked. "It's not like the sky has collapsed or anything. Even if it has, don't we still have this handsome guy to hold it up for us?" "There's a vial of pills that haven't disintegrated yet," the person shouted. "What?" Meng Wei jumped up and immediately dashed over. Even Ling Han followed behind her curiously. Most of the pills had already turned into dust, yet there was one vial whose contents hadn't. Even those who didn't understand alchemy could guess that there was something extraordinary about this vial of pills. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to last until now. Berserk Blood Spirit Pill? Meng Wei accepted the vial of pills and read its label. What kind of pill is this? Everyone shook their heads. None of them had ever heard of this pill before. This is a rare Sun-Moon tier pill. It can help those at the Sun-Moon tier raise their cultivation level by 1 subminor level. In other words, it can save them tens of thousands of years of time. A voice suddenly traveled over, explaining the use of this pill. "Who is it?" They all turned around to look at the door. "I'm Ji Zhengping," the person standing at the door said. However, due to the darkness of the room, and due to the fact that light was coming down from behind him, they could only make out his silhouette. Even so, they could still tell that he was a very slim person. The person paused for a moment before saying, "Hand the divine pill over, and I can spare your lives." "What if we don't?" Meng Wei asked. "If you don't?" Ji Zhengping chuckled and spread his right hand open. There was an egg-sized object in his hand, and he said, "This is a viper poison explosive pill. It will explode immediately once thrown, and it will also release a terrifying poison, believe me. No one below the Sun-Moon tier will be able to survive. Humans won't, and demonic beasts won't either. If you inhale even a wisp, you'll die of the poison in half a breath's time. There's no exception to this." Meng Wei and the others were all deeply astonished. This person wasn't lying. Viper poison explosive pills were indeed as devastating as he said. However, it was questionable whether he was really holding a viper poison explosive pill. "I'll give you guys 15 minutes to decide. If you still refuse to hand the pill over, I'll have no option but to throw this viper poison explosive pill into the room." Ji Zhengping chuckled before continuing, "I truly despise killing people, so it's best that you guys don't force me to." No one knew whether he was telling the truth or not. However, if he were genuinely telling the truth, then that was far too terrifying. Meng Wei and the others didn't dare to act rashly. As mercenaries, they always walked on a tightrope between life and death. However, it was also because of this that they cherished their lives even more. If they stayed alive, everything would be possible. If they died, however, everything would become void. Ling Han furrowed his brows in thought. He couldn't determine whether Ji Zhengping was bluffing or whether he actually possessed a weapon of great devastation. He wasn't afraid, but what about Meng Wei and the others? If that's the case, he stealthily hid in the darkness before retrieving his annihilating Dragon Star arrow. He didn't need the ultimate arrow. With his current power, even an ordinary arrow would be able to insta-kill a cultivator at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. There was a smug smile on Xi Jinping's face. He was able to control the situation all by himself, and this made him feel very good about himself. However, his hair suddenly stood on ends as a sense of foreboding gripped at his heart. Danger! He had no time to think, and he frantically scrambled back in retreat. Shoo! A cold flash streaked through the air. It was insanely quick, and it ruthlessly penetrated his left shoulder. The powerful force of the strike sent him flying backward. Chapter 1180 Unexpected Encounter. Chapter 1180 Unexpected Encounter. Meng Wei and the others faltered for a moment before roaring loudly and charging toward the man. Phut! He actually dared to threaten us. They charged out of the secret room. There was a lot of space in the manor, and as such, the viper poison explosive pill could only affect one person at most. It wouldn't be like just then, where everyone was apprehensive of its effects. Cold sweat dripped down Xi Jinping's forehead. The arrow from that mysterious person had completely penetrated his shoulder. In fact, it had almost taken his life. It was far too terrifying. If it hadn't been for his incredible reaction speed, that arrow would have definitely obliterated his heart. Fear lingered in his mind. If he had been a tiny bit slower just then, he would have already been a corpse on the ground. Ha ha ha! Junior brother G, it looks like you're in quite the bind, no? Shoo! Another 4 people leaped over, each of them radiating with a powerful aura. If Ling Han were to come out from the secret room at this moment, he would realize that there was an old friend of his among these 4 people. Sha Yuan. Xi Jinping gritted his teeth in pain as he pulled the light arrow from his shoulder. Blood instantly sprayed into the air, and he couldn't stop it no matter what. This was inevitable, as Ling Han's martial intent was naturally imbued into the arrow. If it wasn't eliminated, his blood would continue to flow. Moreover, he would end up with a scar if it wasn't eliminated completely, a scar that would remain forever. He humphed and said, "There's an astonishingly powerful person in that room." "Oh, even junior brother G reckons that person is powerful," a blue-robed youth said with a smile. "I've got to see just how impressive they are. I'll hand the people outside to you, then. That should be fine, right?" "Of course," Sha Yuan said with a cold smile. His eyes turned to Meng Wei, and he didn't attempt to hide his lust. He had always been a playboy, and he had been able to do as pleased in Point Star City. However, his life had become extremely dull after he entered this mystery realm. In fact, he was already nearing his wit's end. Thus, flames of lust naturally burned in his heart now that a seductive and bold beauty had appeared before him. "What are you looking at?" Meng Wei humphed and said, "I don't like soft, pretty boys like you. So, don't even think about betting me. Otherwise, I'll kick your nuts into oblivion." Her words were incredibly bold. Sha Yuan chuckled and said, "Once you fall into my hands, it won't be a matter of whether you like it or not." Once he spoke, Ling Han, who was still in the secret room, could naturally hear him loud and clear. He couldn't help but smile coldly. He hadn't gone looking for Sha Yuan, yet Sha Yuan had delivered himself to him. This is excellent. It's time for me to kill him. He swiped his hand across his face, and his appearance instantly underwent a dramatic change. However, he hadn't disguised himself into another person. Rather, he had reverted back to his true appearance. Disciples of the Majestic Heaven sect obviously couldn't kill each other. Even if they were fighting over treasures in a mystery realm, they would stop fighting once someone achieved victory. Of course, some would still kill their fellow disciples if there were no witnesses. After all, who would know that they were the culprit? However, it was Han Lin that was the disciple of the Majestic Heaven sect, not Ling Han. It was because of this that Ling Han reverted back to his true appearance. In any case, he wanted to dispose of Sha Yuan with his true identity as well. Exacting revenge in this manner would feel far more satisfying. "You guys stay here," Ling Han said to Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun. He didn't want to risk exposing the fact that he was Han Lin. Shui Yenyu nodded in understanding. Meanwhile, Hu Feiyun appeared a little confused as she nodded. She didn't understand why Ling Han was suddenly reverting back to his true appearance. Ling Han strode out of the secret room. Sha Yuan was just about to launch into action, yet he suddenly faltered when he saw the person that had walked out of the secret room. Ling Han. How is this possible? Why is he also here? Ever since entering the large tomb in the galaxy, Ling Han hadn't appeared again. The recruitment examination for the Majestic Heaven sect had occurred 1 year after he had entered the large tomb, and Ling Han naturally hadn't attended. Thus, many people speculated that Ling Han had died in the large tomb. That being the case, it came as a huge shock for Sha Yuan to see Ling Han here. Ling Han, Sha Yuan said with a cold humph. He had wished to see Ling Han dead for a long time. Yet Ling Han seemed to be extremely fortunate, and he wouldn't die no matter what. However, he would personally kill him this time, so how could Ling Han escape? This person had huge secrets and valuable treasures. Sha Yuan would definitely make these his own. Would he lose to Ling Han? No way. Ling Han had only been at the high extreme of the mountain river tier when he entered the large tomb. Only a mere 3 years had passed since then, so there was no way his cultivation level could have reached any great heights. Brilliant! I can't believe we've come across each other here. Sha Yuan chuckled coldly and said, You've already escaped far too many times. However, I'm going to personally kill you this time, and I definitely won't let you escape again. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh loudly and said, Sha Yuan, you're living in your own fantasy world. Right now, the gulf between him and Sha Yuan was like the distance between heaven and earth. It's only been a mere 3 years. Don't tell me that you've suddenly become stronger? Sha Yuan didn't believe for a second that Ling Han could become stronger than him. To immortals, 3 years was a very short amount of time. In fact, it was too little time to advance even 1 subminor level. Junior brother Sha, you know this person? It was clear that all 5 of them were from the Majestic Heaven sect. Moreover, they were all key disciples. Although they weren't as talented as seeds, their cultivation levels weren't necessarily lower. All 5 of them were at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. In addition, the fact that they were key disciples meant that they were at least 3-star geniuses. Thus, they weren't afraid even though Xi Jinping had been severely wounded by a single arrow. They were still brimming with confidence. Of course I know him. He's a bumpkin that arrived after opening the sky. Sha Yuan said in disdain. Oh. The other 4 people all nodded in understanding. At the same time, they lost all interest in Ling Han. If he were the heir of some powerful force, then him opening the sky would be extremely impressive. However, Sha Yuan had already labeled him as a bumpkin. This revealed that Ling Han was indigenous to some small world and didn't have any background in the immortal realm. Thus, they naturally didn't need to pay any attention to him. Since junior brother Sha has old enmity with him, we'll let you dispose of him, the blue-robed youth said. He continued to stare at the secret room as he said this. It was the elite who had wounded Xi Jinping that made him feel fearful. Meanwhile, Meng Wei and the others were all slightly puzzled. Why had Ling Han's appearance suddenly changed so drastically? If it weren't for his clothes being the same, and if it weren't for the fact that Ling Han sounded extremely similar to Han Lin, they would have had serious suspicions that this Ling Han had been hiding in the secret room this entire time. I'd love to, Sha Yuan said as he stared at Ling Han. His eyes were filled with killing intent. To be completely honest, he hadn't actually wanted to enter the Majestic Heaven sect. He had been an extremely profligate young master in Point Star City, and he had been able to do as he pleased. Even if he got into trouble, there was his father's influence to protect him. However, what was his life like in the Majestic Heaven sect? His background had become completely insignificant. There were far too many disciples who were the descendants or heirs of heavenly body tier elites. As a result, his feeling of superiority had vanished into thin air. After arriving at the majestic heaven sect, it was as if he had fallen from the clouds into a puddle of mud. There was nothing for him to feel superior about. However, if he could obtain Ling Han's secrets, he would definitely advance in leaps and bounds and become a seed-level prodigy. That would be tremendously impressive. "Ling Han, your secrets are mine," he roared. He lashed out with his right hand as he lunged toward Ling Han. Countless divine patterns surged out, transforming into a giant hand that measured 300 meters in length. Chapter 1181. Who else wants to stop me? Chapter 1181. Who else wants to stop me? Sha Yuan's talent in martial arts was indeed inferior to Zhao Luwen's, but his skills were truly impressive for him to be recruited as a key disciple. The large hand descended, covering the skies and blocking the sun. A cold smirk curled up the corners of his lips. What was this genius of the Scarlet Heaven Academy worth in front of him? No wonder how freakish or how genius you were. Cultivation level was the deciding factor. Go die. He would take advantage of the instant before Ling Han's soul dispersed to extract his memories and obtain all the fated opportunities the latter had gained. Ling Han shook his head. What effect would this kind of attack have on the present him? He puffed up his cheeks and then blew out a breath of air skywards. Pah! That huge hand of origin power instantly crumbled, turning into endless scattered shadows and floating out in all directions. Crap! Sha Yuan and his group were all gaping wide in dumbfounded shock, completely unable to believe their eyes. That was too exaggerated, wasn't it? Just blowing out a breath of air was already so awesome. That was not just a boast. This guy. Could it be that he was in the Sun-Moon tier? But Sun-Moon tiers wouldn't be able to enter here. Even if some forces nurtured a few Sun-Moon tiers and commanded them to destroy their own cultivation level, and then boost their power through consuming some banned medicine to return back to the Sun-Moon tier, with how young Ling Han was, could he possibly crumble his own cultivation level? No, impossible. Sha Yuan should be the most familiar with Ling Han among their group. His whole face was filled with disbelief. Pointing at Ling Han, he exclaimed, "How could you possibly possess this kind of battle prowess? This is absolutely impossible." Sha Yuan, there are many things that may seem impossible to you, but they will still become reality. For example, that I will kill you. Ling Han declared malevolently. If he had said such words earlier on, Sha Yuan definitely would not have believed him. But Ling Han had dispersed his giant hand of origin power with just a breath of air. The power gap between both sides was clearly visible. Sha Yuan humphed and said, "Fine, count yourself lucky this time. You can leave." Ling Han was surprised, practically not daring to believe his own ears. This guy still thought that he had the upper hand, didn't he? He actually said that Ling Han could leave as if he had granted him some great mercy. Ling Han understood now. This guy felt too good about himself, still thinking that this was Point Star City, and he was the son of the great General Sha, and could do as he liked because he had the signboard of Heavenly Body Tier behind him. What is it? Why aren't you getting lost? Sha Yuan asked coldly, appearing very impatient. He had already granted him great leniency, so why did this guy not quickly thank him heartily for the mercy and get lost? Ling Han shook his head and said, "Sha Yuan, in the past, I only thought that you were arrogant, a tyrant, and a profligate young master. Only now do I realize how terribly wrong I was." "Haha, you finally discovered how exceptional I am, right?" Sha Yuan thought, a sliver of a smile curling up his lips. "You are a fuck idiot." Ling Han continued, "Fuck." Sha Yuan's smiling face immediately became incredibly awkward. He had never expected such a sudden turn of events, and that Ling Han would actually betray his expectations. He balefully asked, "What exactly do you want to do?" "Nothing much. I just want to borrow your head." Ling Han said calmly, You are looking for death." Sha Yuan flew into a rage. Who was he? He was the son of an elite of heavenly body tier, and someone actually said that he wanted to borrow his head. Furthermore, this man was a bumpkin from a small world. Ling Han shook his head and said, "I had better not speak too much nonsense with you, or even my intelligence may be dragged down by you. All right, then. I have allowed you to speak so much before you die. It's about time that you pass on. You dare to kill me?" Sha Yuan was filled with shock, a gigantic shock. He practically could not accept this reality. Who was he? How high was his status? Yet Ling Han actually wanted to kill him. Ling Han did not answer him further, and merely stretched out his right hand. A strong power began to condense, and killing intent also simmered below the surface. Now it was Sha Yuan, and it would be Zhao Lun later. For those that owed him a debt, he would ask them for repayment one by one. He flicked a finger, and Xiao, a flash of sword light, swept past, heading to slash at Sha Yuan. Pooh! Blood spattered, but Sha Yuan had not been sliced in half. A flash of golden light flickered on him as if he had transformed into a god of war clad in golden armor. Ling Han's eyes widened, and he could see that there was actually a golden decree wrapped around Sha Yuan's body. It was precisely that decree that had taken effect in the nick of time, blocking Ling Han's fatal strike. Obviously, this was a decree that the great General Sha had bequeathed to his son. "You, how dare you?" Sha Yuan was in a towering rage. Even his voice was trembling. If this decree had actually taken effect, that only meant one thing had encountered a fatal danger. Only that would cause this decree to take effect automatically. He had almost died. "You deserve to die!" Sha Yuan roared loudly. This decree could only be activated by external stimuli, but now that it had been activated, how could he possibly let such an opportunity pass by? He was going to use this chance precisely to kill Ling Han. He moved, and as he shot out a punch, the decree boosted his attack, turning into a golden bull that charged towards Ling Han. Sigh, why were these rich kids so difficult to kill? While Ling Han was still mocking his enemy in his heart, Sha Yuan gave a muffled grunt and looked to be in pain. Furthermore, the golden light on his body also trembled for a while. The decree was bright at one moment and dim at another, just as if it was going to be extinguished. The bull also dispersed by itself along with the power of the decree. At first, Ling Han was startled. He hadn't even made his move yet. So why did Sha Yuan look to be in tremendous pain? However, he immediately understood. There were restrictions in place here. The moment one's power reached the Sun-Moon tier, one would definitely be targeted. Previously, the decree had activated to block a strike from him. Though its might was extraordinary, it had not reached the level of the Sun-Moon tier yet. But now that Sha Yuan was taking the initiative to attack and stimulating the decree, his power had reached the level of the Sun-Moon tier. Naturally, he would be targeted by the restrictions of this place. He had not damaged his enemy yet, but had damaged himself first. Sha Yuan himself did not understand it yet, and thought that Ling Han had used some kind of secret technique to target him. Not only did he not suppress the might of the decree, he further drew upon the power of the decree. After the decree was activated, its power would slowly wear down. Even if he left it alone, he could not possibly regain it. Thus, he naturally wanted to take advantage of this rare opportunity to kill Ling Han. However, as he drew upon its power, he was yelling out in even more pain. The decree trembled endlessly, as if it was about to shatter apart at any moment. The decree finally crumbled, turning into pieces that flew in all directions. Sha Yuan immediately experienced the backlash and was throwing up blood madly. Thankfully, he had not been destroyed along with the decree. His bafflement was clear for all to see. What was going on here? Was this the result when a decree activated? He pointed at Ling Han and asked in a shaking voice, "You, what demonic tricks have you used? How ignorant!" Ling Han shook his head, and with a flick of his finger, sword light swept past, heading to slice at Sha Yuan. "Stop!" Ji Jinping and the others leaped out, helping Sha Yuan to disperse this blow. However, though this was just a careless strike from Ling Han, his present power had reached 8 stars above the peak stage of the mountain river tier. So how strong was he? Pung, 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 pung. All 4 of them were sent flying by this blow. However, also because of this, Sha Yuan managed to fortunately escape death. "If you all want to help him, I will slice you apart together as well," Ling Han said calmly. "So, who else wants to stop me?" Chapter 1182, Killing Sha Yuan. Chapter 1182, Killing Sha Yuan. You are that mysterious man." The 4 people from the Majestic Heaven sect all pointed at Ling Han. Only now did they realize that this man could not possibly be the bumpkin that Sha Yuan had spoken of, but was instead the mysterious elite that had wounded Ji Jinping with a single arrow. Impossible. When had there appeared yet another powerful king tier in the young generation? Just looking at that attack just now, it was definitely capable of matching those of He Tao, Wu Jia, and the other king tiers. Ling Han's eyes swept over them, and he demanded, "Leave your spatial spirit tools behind, then get lost." These people wanted to rob him, so there was naturally no reason for him to let them go unscathed. That would be letting them off too easy. "Don't go too far," Ji Jinping shouted in anger. However, as his shoulder was still streaming blood, it seriously impacted his image. He absolutely radiated no intimidation to speak of. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "The path that you have previously walked on had been too smooth, hadn't it? To actually utter such naive words. Humph! In front of me, who do you think you are? If you do not obediently leave your spatial spirit tools behind, then I will kill all of you." Ji Jinping felt as if he had suffered a tremendous humiliation, yet he couldn't help but think that he, too, had used the viper poison explosive pill as a threat. If they did not hand over the berserk blood spirit pill, he would kill them, and now they were just getting their desserts. Fair. In this world, whoever had the stronger power would represent what was fair. Well, aren't you ruthless? Ji Jinping and the others all drew out their spatial rings, which they then threw onto the ground, appearing to be very indignant. They could all be considered geniuses, and it had always been them who could behave unscrupulously. When have they been humiliated like this before? Sha Yuan, too, tossed out a spatial ring, and was just about to leave with Ji Jinping and the others. Ling Han broke into laughter in spite of himself and said, "Young Master Sha, has your head been kicked by a donkey? Did I say you could leave? Ling Han, you truly want to kill me? Aren't you afraid that my father would fly into a rage and race over here to take your wretched life?" Sha Yuan asked ferociously. Now that the decree had been destroyed, he had finally become truly afraid. When he spoke these words, he was merely putting on a fierce facade to hide his fear. Ling Han shook his head and said, "With such a dishonest son like you, I believe that great General Sha would not mind having one less." "Sir, you have already obtained riches. So why do you have to be so imperious?" a young man in blue advised. The 5 of them had come together, so he was naturally unwilling to see his companion being killed. "If I have killed your whole family, then tell you, since they have all died, don't be so forceful anymore. Would you be pleased or not?" Ling Han cast an eye on him, and then impatiently said, in 3 breaths, "All of you get lost. If not, you all can die with him." He was truly angered now, and his frightening aura was like an ocean, incredibly terrifying. Ji Jinping and the others were all shocked. This was definitely a King Tier's aura. How could a King Tier allow others to challenge their authority? All their faces were pallid, and they all turned and left. Not daring to say one more word of nonsense to avoid being killed by Ling Han together with Sha Yuan, since Ling Han had already decided to kill a key disciple of the Majestic Heaven sect, who furthermore was the son of a heavenly body tier. It wouldn't be a big issue to him to kill a few more key disciples and descendants of heavenly body tier. Don't leave, save me. Save me. Sha Yuan was dumbfounded. This was the first time that he felt death was so near to him, causing him to feel cold all over. Xi Jinping and the others ignored his pleas and ran away quickly. Sha Yuan turned around blankly, looked at Ling Han for a while, and then suddenly said, "Don't kill me. I can become your friend. I am the son of an elite of heavenly body tier. If you have a friend like me, that would definitely not be a loss to you." Ling Han broke into a smile and said, "I really do not want to say such things to scare you. However, since you feel so good about yourself, if I did not give you a bit of a blow, I really couldn't live with myself. On the topic of friends, I have a friend who is a saint. Furthermore, the Empress herself would be my wife in future. This friendship of yours, sigh, I really couldn't care less." Sha Yuan was gaping in open-mouthed shock. "You must be lying to me." "Saint? How could that be? Only those in the Genesis tier could be called saints. If you were able to be friends with a saint, then wouldn't you be able to do as you liked in this world? And you actually said you wanted to marry the Empress? Pay! How noble and remote was her Imperial Majesty, the Empress? Even his old man could only salivate in secret. So what right did Ling Han have to say so? You are a man who is about to die, so there is no need to deceive you. However, there is also no need for me to force you to believe me." Ling Han smiled. "Are you prepared to die now?" Sha Yuan only felt a coldness all over his whole body. His legs involuntarily weakened, and he was down on his knees, weeping, "Don't kill me! I don't want to die. I don't want to die." "That's right. No one wants to die." Ling Han raised his hand. "But for the sake of your selfish desires, you coveted the fated opportunities one have achieved and sent assassins to hunt me down and kill me. I fear that if I had not had a few tricks up my sleeve, grass would have already long started growing on my grave." He threw out a punch, and a terrifying power descended. Pah! Sha Yuan had instantly exploded into nothing, both his figure and spirit destroyed, turning into a bloody mist that filled the air. There was not even a complete part of his corpse left behind. "Hey, handsome, now that you have killed a disciple of the Majestic Heaven sect, would you want to kill us as well to keep the secret?" Meng Wei swallowed with much difficulty. The others all hurriedly cast looks at their leader, as if to say, "Why the fuck are you asking him that? Why don't we just play dumb, then secretly sneak away? Now that you asked, aren't you simply reminding him of that?" Ling Han laughed loudly and said, "It's fine. In any case, I have already let 4 people flee, so I would not mind leaving a few more people alive. You guys aren't planning to tell on me, are you?" Meng Wei and his group hurriedly shook their heads in denial. "That's great." Ling Han picked up the spatial rings that Xi Jinping and his group had left behind, and drew out the items inside one after another. Then he stored them into the Black Tower. If he placed them in his own spatial ring, then what if they were found in the future? He would then be identified as the murderer. But if he placed them in the Black Tower, who would be able to find them there? "Handsome, this bottle of Berserk blood spirit pills is yours." Meng Wei handed over the alchemical pill bottle she had just gained. Ling Han smiled and asked, "Haven't we decided to split equally?" "You have saved us another time. Furthermore, we have also obtained so many pill recipes, so we have already greatly profited. As humans, we should not be too greedy." Meng Wei shook her head. "All right." Ling Han accepted the alchemical pills. In the process of obtaining the treasure trove here, it was him who worked the hardest. So even if he took an additional bottle, even if it was a bottle, there was actually only a single alchemical pill inside it, would not be too much to ask. "Then, handsome, We will excuse ourselves here." Meng Wei clasped her hands, and when Ling Han nodded, she added, "You really don't want to have some nice goodbye **X. Fuck off." After they watched Meng Wei and his group leave, Ling Han and his group also set out. However, Ling Han's attention had been drawn to the pill recipes that he had just obtained. He would definitely be unable to concoct an alchemical pill above level 5, as the requirement for his divine sense was rather big. However, he could barely be capable of level 5. After all, his spirit was continuously being tempered by the indestructible Heaven Scroll, and was far stronger than the spirit of an ordinary mountain river tier. Moreover, he had also stepped into the pinnacle level. He searched for a while and discovered that, astonishingly, the Berserk Blood Spirit Pill recipe was amongst these pill recipes. Chapter 1183 Red Rain Divine King Tree. Chapter 1183 Red Rain Divine King Tree. The Berserk Blood Spirit Pill would boost up a Sun Moon tier by a subminor level upon consumption, and there was no limitation to cultivation level. It meant that if someone in the middle stage of the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier took one, he would be able to reach the late stage of the low extreme, and if someone in the early stage of the consummate level took one, he, too, could similarly reach the middle stage of the consummate level. This effect was too astonishing. However, when Ling Han looked at the ingredients listed out in the pill recipe, he gritted his teeth. An alchemical pill that could defy nature naturally would require extremely amazing ingredients as well. One of the most important main ingredients was called the fruit of the Red Rain Divine King Tree. Though it was only a level 8 godly medicine, it was incredibly rare. Furthermore, the required age for the fruit to be capable of usage was as much as 1,000,000 years. If this was in the Black Tower from the moment of planting onwards, it would still need as long as 1,000 years. For immortals, a millennium was indeed not long. Mountain river tiers might not even be capable of advancing further in that amount of time. However, Ling Han had advanced through the cultivation levels too quickly, so 1,000 years was really something he could not accept. However, if he managed to find the fruit of the Red Rain Divine King Tree, he would still gather them. Even if not for himself, he could also prepare it for his brothers, the friends by his side, his beautiful wives and lovers, parents and children. In short, this kind of precious medicine was the more the better, and he would definitely not ignore it. Of course, if it would have an obvious effect on even cultivators at the consummate level of the Sun Moon tier, the Berserk Blood Spirit Pill was naturally a level 8 divine pill. If it was consumed by cultivators in the low extreme, medium extreme, and high extreme of the Sun Moon tier, there would be a certain amount of risk, as they could possibly explode from the powerful effects. Thus, if these people consumed the Berserk Blood Spirit Pill, they had to have a senior protecting them from the sidelines, using the power of a great elite to suppress the medicinal effects. Otherwise, if they really died from consuming medicine, wouldn't that be too worthless a death? Ling Han placed the Berserk Blood Spirit Pill aside first. Firstly, his divine sense was not strong enough at present, and secondly, there were no ingredients for him to begin concoction. The first one he prepared to concoct was the 1,000 Crane Pill. It could grant all cultivators below the heavenly body tier the ability to fly, though it was only temporary, expiring when the medicinal effects were no longer active. Furthermore, it could cause one's speed to spike rapidly, so it was very practical. In a crucial time, it could be used to save a life. A life-saving alchemical pill was definitely the most valuable. The three of them journeyed during the day, and they would stop to rest at night. Traveling in this kind of dangerous place, they naturally had to ensure that their best condition was maintained as much as possible. At night, Ling Han would comprehend the pill recipes underneath the reincarnation tree. He was the alchemy emperor and was naturally a maniac in this field as well. Once he began his studies, he was unstoppable. For a considerable number of days, he would be sitting by himself under the reincarnation tree, which made Shui Yinyu feel strange. Usually, Ling Han would be teasing her, causing her to blush furiously, greatly embarrassed. But now, he had been treating her like empty air for several days in a row by now. He did not even see the seductive signals that she had been casting with her eyes. She was practically going to die of fury. It was either that he was like a damn pervert, or he would be serious like a complete gentleman. Completely two opposite ends of the spectrum. After walking for another few days, a mountain appeared ahead of them. This mountain could only be considered half a mountain, as if it had been slashed in half at about halfway up. The remaining half of the mountain now appeared a little weird as it ended abruptly. There were figures flickering on the mountain, and it was not just one or two, but rather an extremely large number of them. Ling Han and his group walked to the foot of the mountain, and then found out that this was a mountain of herbs. There was a great many types of godly medicine growing here. Low-grade godly medicine could be harvested as much as one liked, but high-grade godly medicine would be guarded by restrictions. If one wanted to dissolve these restrictions, it was very difficult. There were some that could not even possibly be broken through, and would require at least power on the level of the heavenly body tier. Ling Han couldn't help but feel pleased. Perhaps there might be ripe fruits of the red rain divine king tree here. Then he would only need to advance into sun moon tier, and he would be able to concoct the berserk blood spirit pill. His abilities would then soar consequently. Moreover, even if it wasn't for the sake of the fruit of the red rain divine king tree, as long as there was godly medicine, wasn't it all worth harvesting? The three of them had apparently come a little late. The low-grade, godly medicines that were not protected by restrictions here had all been harvested. However, Ling Han was not all that interested in these types of godly medicine. In any case, there was already a great amount of godly medicine being cultivated inside the Black Tower, though its grade was slightly lower. They searched as they walked, and very soon found a few godly medicines that were protected by restrictions. Their grade was as high as level 7, but they were not ripe yet. Going by Ling Han's deduction, it should be the mother plant had ripened, but because it had not been harvested, its seeds fell onto its original grounds, which resulted in a number of new plants. Because this area had been designed for a single godly medicine to grow in the first place, there were now a good number, and though it did not appear crowded, the nutrients were obviously inadequate, which caused these few stalks of godly medicine to appear a little dispirited. "I have allowed you all to suffer. I will soon save you," Ling Han said, smiling involuntarily. "I haven't seen someone as shameless as you. You are obviously using them to concoct alchemical pills, and still make it seem as if you are the savior." Hu Feiyun made a face at him. "Then don't eat the alchemical pills I concoct." Ling Han replied with a grin. "I was just saying you're being so petty." Hu Feiyun said with a pout. Ling Han circled a few times around the godly medicine, and first memorized the restrictions. Then he began to simulate the restrictions beneath the reincarnation tree. After a while, he left the Black Tower and began to break through the restrictions. This was more time-consuming than he had expected. Only after 17 days had passed did Ling Han finally manage to break through the restrictions and store these several-level 7 godly medicines into the Black Tower. Going by the rate we're going, even if we spent the whole half a year here, we wouldn't be able to take away much godly medicine. Ling Han shook his head. "We had best search first to see if there are any fruits of the Red Rain Divine King Tree. This is the most valuable godly medicine to me right now." Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun would naturally not disagree. Furthermore, they, too, would be able to use the alchemical pills he concocted, so there was even less of a chance for them to have objections. Ling Han gave up the idea of scooping up the whole lot and began to look for the fruit of the Red Rain Divine King Tree. If he could find it, he would put in his full efforts to collect it. If there was none, he would have to turn back to find the most valuable godly medicines here. No matter what, he would have to take a few of them back. However, even he had to spend more than a dozen days to be able to break through a single set of restrictions, and that was equivalent to over a dozen years. Others would naturally only be capable of feeling powerless. Thus, unless they had brought a specialized, precious tool that could break through the restrictions, the majority would only be able to harvest those ordinary, godly medicines that were not protected by restrictions. Because they were only searching and not collecting, after a mere half a day's time, Ling Han had just about searched through the whole mountain of medicine. Just when they were about to end their search, his eyes finally lit up, and he looked pleasantly surprised. It really is the fruit of the red rain divine king tree. Ling Han laughed loudly. In front of him, there was a tree 30 meters tall. It was crimson all over, and its leaves were formed from flames, continuing to burn fiercely. And between the tree leaves, there were multiple fruits growing. These fruits were producing steam, which dripped onto the fruits like raindrops, making for quite an amazing sight. Ling Han was naturally happy. Though these fruits had not completely ripened, they were already very big. If he transplanted them into the Black Tower, they might be able to completely ripen in 3 to 5 years' time. This was really a huge gift. There was a total of 27 fruits, and if one fruit could be concocted into one berserk blood spirit pill, that would be equivalent to 27 pills. Of course, that was only possible if he succeeded every time and did not waste even a single fruit. This was naturally impossible. Who could successfully concoct an alchemical pill with only one attempt? Ling Han rubbed his hands together and began to study how to break through the restrictions. Chapter 1184, Ginseng Spirit. Chapter 1184, Ginseng Spirit. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Time quietly crept by. The restriction on the red rain divine king tree was stronger than Ling Han had anticipated, and he still hadn't been able to undo it even after 20 days. However, meditating on this medicinal mountain in addition to comprehending Tao under the reincarnation tree actually helped his cultivation level advance another step. He had managed to form his 5th river. Right now, he had reached the late stage of the pinnacle level. If he advanced another step, he would reach the peak stage of the pinnacle level. This was the true limit of the mountain river tier, and one would possess a power of 10 stars upon reaching this level. In other words, their power would be on par with that of elites at the early stage of the low extreme of the sun-moon tier. What an unexpected surprise! Ling Han said with a shake of his head. He hadn't managed to crack the restriction, yet his cultivation had advanced in leaps and bounds. However, this was only natural. They ate godly medicine all day long, and more importantly, they could comprehend Tao under the reincarnation tree. That being the case, their cultivation would definitely advance rapidly even if they didn't want it to. Shui Yenyu's and Hu Feiyun's cultivation speed was also very quick. In fact, Shui Yenyu had already advanced to the consummate level. When considering the amount of time she had cultivated, this was an astonishing feat. Perhaps she would even become a key disciple upon returning to the majestic heaven sect. Meanwhile, Hu Feiyun managed to advance to the pinnacle level. She was a clone of Empress Luanxing, so she had actually completed this process 9 times already. Thus, completing it for the 10th time was naturally as easy as a pie. It was just that she had been extremely flustered and panicked when undergoing a heavenly tribulation. It had truly been a sorry sight. When Empress Luanxing didn't take control of her body, her battle prowess would be unbearably weak. So-called 1-star geniuses and 2-star geniuses could battle against those 1 and 2 subminor levels above them, respectively. Meanwhile, the large majority of people possessed a battle prowess that was equivalent to their cultivation level. However, what about Hu Feiyun? She was an utter embarrassment. Her battle prowess was at least 1 to 2 subminor levels below her cultivation level. As such, she could be labeled as a negative star idiot. I'm not an idiot. It's just that I don't want to fight, she said in defense. However, she was still teased by Ling Han and Shui Yinyu. Even the Azura Demon Emperor dared to tease this master's wife. In any case, she could still suppress those at the consummate level of the mountain river tier with ease, even if she was a negative star idiot. This was thanks to her incredible cultivation level. The pinnacle level was the pinnacle level after all. Before other mountain river tier cultivators, those who had reached this level were as mighty and as indomitable as sun moon tier elites. Shui Yenyu was extremely envious of Hu Feiyun. She knew the limits of her own abilities, and she knew that it would be impossible for her to reach the pinnacle level, no matter how hard she worked. However, the ditzy Hu Feiyun had advanced to this level without so much as a sliver of effort. Wife, don't be discouraged. Her situation is unique, Ling Han said in comfort. Shui Yenyu was aware of this, yet she still couldn't bring herself to accept it, especially when she looked at Hu Feiyun's muddle-headed and innocent expression. Another 10 days passed, and Ling Han finally managed to undo the restriction. He placed the incredibly precious red Rain Divine King tree into his black tower root, soil and all. Planting this godly medicine in the black tower signified that it had truly become his. Ling Han was ecstatic, and he pecked Shui Yenyu's cheek, saying, "Mission accomplished. Let's enjoy a kiss." Shameless D*quad, eat my foot. Xiao! A furious shout suddenly sounded, and a streak of white dashed over at an incredibly quick speed. Although the unwelcome arrival had shouted, "Eat my foot," the size of the white shadow made it abundantly clear that this wasn't a person. Ling Han had no time to dodge, so he immediately unleashed his fast technique, using his finger as a sword as he slashed toward the white shadow. Wong! His finger collided with the white shadow, instantly forming devastating shock waves. Pung, 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 pung. Furious shock waves surged into the surroundings, forcing Shui Yenyu and Hu Feiyun to jump back in retreat. Only at this moment did Ling Han see that white shadow clearly. A look of astonishment appeared on his face. Sure enough, this wasn't a person. Rather, it was a medicine, a ginseng-shaped medicine. However, it actually had 2 legs and 2 arms, and there was even a human face on its head. Fuck! This godly medicine has gained a life of its own. Ling Han laughed loudly and shouted, "Demonic ginseng, hurry up and return to my bowl!" Since it was able to develop a spirit, this ginseng was definitely extremely high grade. If he ate it, would his cultivation level soar by 1 or 2 minor levels? Ugly man, you're still 800 years too young to eat your grandpa, the ginseng roared in anger. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and release that girl. She's mine. Fuck. Ling Han lashed out with a kick and said, "You're a senile old ginseng. Yet you actually want to steal my wife." "What do you mean your wife? I have my eyes on her, so she's my property." The ginseng wasn't willing to back down, and it continued to use movement techniques to dodge Ling Han's attacks. Its power was nothing to write home about, yet its speed was tremendous. Ling Han had to use his fast technique if he wanted to keep up with the ginseng. Meanwhile, his lightning sword technique was still lacking in speed, and thus he had no option but to abandon using it. Pung, 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 pung. The ginseng was relentless in its attacks, though it used the regulations of heaven and earth rather than origin power. The regulations transformed into countless divine chains that whipped toward Ling Han. This was a ridiculous sight. A ginseng was circling around Ling Han and launching a relentless barrage of attacks at him, its actions as quick as lightning. However, what was more unbelievable was the fact that this ginseng was actually a pervert. "Old ginseng, I'm definitely going to eat you." Ling Han used his finger like a sword and continued to launch attacks at the ginseng. He didn't want to wound this godly medicine. It had already developed intelligence and grown limbs, so its medicinal effects were definitely astonishing. The lifespan of godly medicines was far longer than that of cultivators' level 1 godly medicine was equivalent to the low extreme of the mountain river tier. Yet the lifespan of a level 1 godly medicine could reach a maximum of 1,000,000 years. However, it was also because of this that it was extremely difficult for godly medicine to develop intelligence. This was the natural law of heaven and earth. If one's lifespan was long, they would naturally be especially weak and frail. This was the trade-off. Thus, the fact that this godly medicine possessed both intelligence and limbs signified that it had lived for many years. At some point in its life, it had developed a fuzzy awareness, after which it had been able to slowly cultivate. Eventually, it had gained the ability to walk and even managed to grasp the power of regulations. This is a super old ginseng, so it's definitely full of vital energy. Pay, stinky brat, you can eat your grandpa's ginseng feet. The old ginseng launched a kick that generated swirls of terrifying regulations. The old ginseng was especially quick, yet Ling Han's defenses were extremely sturdy. The pinnacle level was no joke. They continued to skirmish, and their battle became more and more intense. Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun were both stunned. An old ginseng could actually be this powerful. What on earth? Tisk, Brother Han, you don't mind if I help, do you? A soft and pleasant voice asked. It belonged to a tall and slender woman. She was genuinely tall, only half an inch shorter than Ling Han. Her raven hair flowed down her back, and she was dressed in a snow-white silk dress. She wore no adornments, yet her breathtaking appearance and stunning figure exemplified the nature of natural beauty. This was Shen Zhu'er, a king tier among the younger generation of the majestic heaven sect. She was asking if Ling Han needed help, yet she extended her hand toward the old ginseng right as she finished speaking. It's a beauty. The old ginseng's eyes lit up, and it charged toward Shen Zhu'er's chest. Shen Zhu'er was given a fright, and she stammered, "Perverted ginseng." She had only just arrived, and she had only stepped forward upon discovering that this old ginseng had already developed a spirit. She knew that it would have incredible medicinal effects. However, she hadn't expected this old ginseng to be such a low-life pervert. It had targeted her breasts with its first attack. How utterly shameless. Chapter 1185, Shameless Ginseng. Chapter 1185, Shameless Ginseng. Even if her opponent was only ginseng, it was clear that Shen Zhu'er still wouldn't allow it to grope her breasts. She hurriedly formed an origin power shield to protect herself. Pooh! The old ginseng unleashed a beam of regulation light that slashed her origin power shield apart. Pieces of silk cloth flew into the air as the chest area of Shen Zhu'er's silk dress was ripped into shreds. However, much to the old ginseng's disappointment, what he once saw wasn't Shen Zhu'er's shapely breasts. Rather, he was met with the sight of a golden dude-with-two. Are these the fabled golden breasts one? The old ginseng drooled as he leered at Shen Zhu'er's breasts. However, he was a spiritual herb, so his drool released an especially fragrant and refreshing smell. It could be said that his drool was also great medicine. Brat, you actually dare to look as well. The old ginseng seethed with rage as he charged toward Ling Han. Be bastard! Shen Zhu'er trembled in anger. She was one of the 6 king tiers, yet she was actually being teased by a mere ginseng. How could she not be furious? Fortunately, she was still wearing a treasure-grade dudu. Otherwise, her breasts really would have been revealed. She was beside herself with rage, and terrifying divine chains formed in the air as she waved her slender hands. They shot toward the old ginseng, and it was clear that she wasn't planning to capture him alive anymore. It was only ginseng after all, so it could still be eaten even if it were beaten into a pulp. Doing so would only affect its medicinal effects slightly. Big-breasted lady, why are you chasing after your grandpa ginseng? The old ginseng continued to tease Shen Zhu'er as he dodged her attacks, saying, That brat also looked at your big breasts, So why aren't you attacking him? He was even complaining about his mistreatment. Die! Shinjur yelled in a shrill voice. She was a king tier of the younger generation, and she should have been calm and composed. However, this old ginseng was far too provocative, and she already was boiling with rage after just 2 or 3 exchanges. She was hell-bent on smashing him into 10,000 pieces. Sigh, Grandpa Ginseng is far too handsome. This big-breasted lady loves me so much that she even wants to kill me. That way, she can eat me and be with me forever. There was a profoundly narcissistic expression on the old ginseng's face, and he said, "It's truly a crime to be as handsome as me." Ling Han felt like he was about to vomit. He teamed up with Shenjuer and shouted, "Despicable ginseng, I've never seen anything as shameless as you before." Of course, Grandpa Ginseng is one of a kind, the old ginseng said smugly. However, he instantly flared up in rage and said, "You dare to scold your grandpa?" This old ginseng was truly detestable. Everything that he said was offensive and provocative. Nets of heaven and earth. Shinjur shouted, the power of regulations intertwined together with her origin power to form a gigantic net. At the same time, Ling Han also unleashed his crimson ground-locking net toward the old ginseng. Upon seeing his paths of retreat being cut off, the old ginseng immediately tunneled into the ground. Xiao! He disappeared in a flash. He was a ginseng that had grown in the soil, and his ability to travel underground hadn't disappeared after he had gained intelligence and the ability to cultivate. Instead, his ability to travel underground had become even stronger. He's gone. Xiao! Just as they thought that he had disappeared, the old ginseng instantly popped up from the ground. Being the despicable ginseng that he was, he actually popped up between Shinjuer's feet and dashed toward her abdomen. Die! Shinjuer was absolutely furious. Her raven black hair billowed violently in the air, and divine light pulsed from her body, transforming into sheets of ice. Ah, you're freezing your grandpa to death. The old ginseng was frozen into a heap, and he fell to the ground with a thud. However, before Ling Han or Shinjuer could capture him, he hurriedly tunneled into the ground again. Ling Han was stunned. Although Shinjuer was being picked on by the old ginseng, this didn't change the fact that she was incredibly powerful. The might of her ice attack was tremendous, and Ling Han estimated that there was an 80% chance that he would be frozen if he were to face such an attack head-on. Even if he wasn't wounded, Shenjuer could seize the opportunity to bind him with divine chains or even kill his friends and family. King Tears couldn't be underestimated. Big-breasted lady, remember not to wear pants under your dress next time. Your grandpa wasn't able to see anything. The old ginseng popped up in the distance, not daring to near Shinjuer. It was clear that he was afraid of her attacks. Shinjuer remained silent as she stared at the old ginseng. She waved an arm, and an expanse of ice instantly spread toward the old ginseng. Grandpa Ginseng's done playing with you guys. The old ginseng hurriedly bore into the ground and fled. He was indeed quick, yet his battle prowess was far weaker than that of Shenjuer and Ling Han. If he faced them head-on, he would merely be seeking death. Moreover, Ling Han hadn't unleashed his divine patterns of flame only because he hadn't wanted to wound the godly medicine. Shinjuer was boiling with anger. So be it if she hadn't obtained that godly medicine. However, she had actually been teased and played with like a fool. She had never experienced such humiliation before. That despicable ginseng can't be underestimated, Ling Han said. Not only is it a high-grade godly medicine, it even managed to develop intelligence after living for countless years. Moreover, it can use the regulations of heaven and earth. It's genuinely achieved Tao. Shinjuer, who wore a furious expression, said, "Who cares if he's achieved the Tao or not? I'm definitely going to kill him." Her breasts had almost been revealed, so she didn't have the face to stay there any longer. She nodded at Ling Han before turning around to leave. How fun! Hu Feiyun said, a bright glimmer in her eyes. You wouldn't be laughing if that despicable ginseng targeted you, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. That old ginseng was far too quick, and perhaps only Sun Moon tier elites would be able to capture him. Let's go! Ling Han resolutely let go of his desire for the godly medicine. There was no point in wasting time if he couldn't capture it. They climbed down the medicinal mountain. As they did so, Ling Han thought about how great it would be if this mystery realm were completely opened. That way, he would have enough time to place all of the godly medicines in this place into his black tower. However, if someone were truly powerful enough to open this mystery realm, would they really leave any treasures for others? It wasn't peaceful inside this mystery realm. There were all kinds of demonic beasts here, and they all fought against one another. They also ate humans. Ling Han and the others were attacked by wave after wave of demonic beasts. However, they were all killed and placed into the Black Tower by Ling Han. These demonic beasts would become their food. He had a huge stock of spiritual meat, and he would enjoy it daily with Shui Yanyu and Hu Feiyun. He could feel his stamina improving. Several more days passed, and another mountain appeared before them. However, Ling Han didn't believe that this was a naturally formed mountain. This was because this mountain was in the shape of a soaring eagle, with each detail being very clear. Is this formed from some dead demonic bird? Immortal-level demonic beasts could reach tens of thousands of meters in height. Thus, it was possible that the Eagle Mountain before them was formed from a demonic bird, even though it was remarkably tall. In any case, this was the most competitive region of the entire mystery realm. This was because thousand-source true fluid would appear here. When the sun and moon crossed paths every day, a drop of thousand-source true fluid would fall from the beak of the demonic bird, leading to huge and violent skirmishes. However, thousand-source true fluid would only appear approximately 3 months after the mystery realm had opened. Moreover, it would only appear for 10 consecutive days. This mystery realm had opened hundreds of times in the past tens of thousands of years, so everyone was naturally aware of this. People speculated that some sort of change would occur when this mystery realm was opened, and it was this change that would gradually lead to the formation of thousand-source true fluid. As for the specifics, no one knew. Ling Han calculated how long they had been here, and he found that there were still a few days until the 3-month mark. He looked the mountain up and down. He suddenly felt an urge to run over and check it out. Chapter 1186, Divine Fluid. Chapter 1186, Divine Fluid. It was very simple why Ling Han wanted to head over to check the mountain out. If he were able to camp under the eagle beak, then wouldn't he be able to easily obtain the thousand-source true fluid when it eventually appeared? However, if it were this simple, why would people still wait at the perimeter of the mountain? If such a tactic worked, they would definitely fight to occupy that spot. In fact, it was because the Eagle Mountain was very difficult to climb. Ling Han immediately realized this upon trying to climb the mountain. Devastating winds lashed around the mountain, and he wasn't able to withstand them even with his powerful physique. He had only taken a few steps before several gashes appeared on his body. If he stayed on the mountain any longer, he would definitely be stripped down to the bare bones. If the winds became stronger the higher one climbed, then even his godly bones would be hacked into pieces. In that case, both his body and soul would be obliterated. Is it truly impossible to climb this mountain? There were still a few days until the 3-month mark, so Ling Han started to experiment with methods to withstand these winds. However, he quickly found that the winds did indeed become stronger the higher one climbed. The strength of the winds wasn't in terms of power. Thus, if these winds possessed strong power, they would blow people off the mountain. However, he hadn't been blown off the mountain, and had instead been viciously cut by the wind. This signified that these winds were formed from the power of regulations. Thus, they were extremely fatal even though they only possessed ordinary power. The offensive power of these winds is at least on par with the medium extreme of the sun-moon tier. Otherwise, they wouldn't cut into my skin and flesh so easily, Ling Han speculated inwardly. However, this was only the foot of the mountain. If the strength of the winds didn't pick up by too much, he could still climb up the mountain if he channeled the indestructible heaven scroll. Forget about it. I'll just wait at the foot of the mountain. With my battle prowess, it shouldn't be too hard to obtain a few drops of thousand-source true fluid. The three of them settled down in a remote location. This way, they could enter the Black Tower with relative ease. Ling Han cultivated and comprehended alchemy. He would occasionally refine a few cauldrons of 7 ultimate flying flame pills, as well these pills were good money-makers. Several more days passed, and the people around the mountain started to become restless. The reason for this was simple. They were about to hit the 3-month mark, which meant that intense competitions and battles were about to begin. After all, even heavenly body tier elites yearned to obtain thousand-source true fluid. If one were able to obtain a drop, they would be able to sell it for an astronomical price. Oh, that's right. Senior, do you have any thousand-source true fluid that you could give me? Ling Han turned to Notionless Saint, who was wrapped around the reincarnation tree, and continued, You're a saint, so you're definitely more impressive than Eternal River tier elites, right? I've already refined my body, so how can I still possess thousand-source true fluid? Notionless Saint humphed and continued, Anyhow, saints can't produce thousand-source true fluid. If their corpses don't disintegrate, the only thing they'll produce is saintly insects. Sigh. What a useless old man. Ling Han sighed in disappointment, which caused Notionless Saint to jump up and down in anger. He, a supreme saint, was actually being disdained by Ling Han. Ling Han told Shui Yinyu and Hu Fei Yun to stay put. The imminent battle would be terrifyingly brutal, and perhaps even the king tiers would have to flee if they managed to obtain a drop. Otherwise, they would definitely suffer great losses if they were attacked by the masses. One had to realize that there were numerous bodyguards here. These people were raised by powerful forces, and they had severed their own cultivation level before ingesting forbidden pills to increase their power. Their battle prowess was infinitely close to the sun-moon tier, and they wouldn't be any weaker than those at the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. As expected, Gao Huang's greed is truly insatiable. He actually wanted me to obtain 3 drops of thousand-source true fluid for him. I wonder what's wrong with his brain. How the hell did he come up with such a condition? Ling Han shook his head as these thoughts flashed through his mind. Anyhow, he wouldn't give a single drop of thousand-source true fluid to Gao Huang even if there were 100 or 1,000 drops available, or even if he were able to obtain half of the available amount. Not to mention, there were only 10 drops available. Why did he have to please Gao Huang? Look, a drop of thousand-source true fluid is forming. Someone shouted as they pointed at the peak of the mountain. Although this mountain was tall, the people here were all immortals. Their eyesight was brilliant, and thus they could clearly see the drop of liquid that was forming on the eagle beak of the mountain. However, it wasn't big enough yet, so it still hadn't dripped down from the mountain. Everyone instantly prepared for battle. Obtaining a drop of thousand-source true fluid could save them tens of thousands of years of hard work. Ling Han didn't move. The wind on this mountain would often change directions, so who knew where this drop of thousand-source true fluid would be blown? It would be foolish to jostle for positions at this moment. Time slowly crept by. Meanwhile, the drop of liquid also became larger and larger. After an entire day, the bead of liquid finally grew to the size of a thumb. It trembled slightly, then rolled off the stone surface of the mountain and floated toward the ground. Whoosh! There was a gust of wind, and the drop of liquid instantly drifted in a completely different direction. Ling Han made his move. Pum! He stamped the ground and he instantly shot out like a cannon. Those who practiced body arts were terrifying because they had explosive speed and explosive power. Xiao, he became as quick as lightning. He was far too powerful right now, and the other cultivators couldn't block him even if he didn't attack them. In fact, the shock waves generated by his devastating speed swept everyone around him aside. This was the power of the pinnacle level. This was the power of 9 stars. Everyone unleashed their abilities at this moment. Meanwhile, numerous elderly cultivators ingested forbidden pills, causing their power to grow explosively. Their power neared the Sun-Moon tier, and they immediately charged toward the drop of Thousand Source True Fluid. Even those at the consummate level of the Mountain River tier were like mere ants before such tremendous power. Their bones were instantly shattered upon being struck by the elderly cultivators. However, no one paid any attention to them. The Thousand Source True Fluid was before their eyes, so who would give a toss about others? Anyhow, weren't they all here for the Thousand Source True Fluid? Thus, whoever was standing here was regarded as a competitor anyway. That being the case, there was no one to blame if one were sent flying or even had their bones crushed. When cultivators fought over treasures, blood and death were always involved. Ling Han was already very kind in that he wasn't killing others wantonly. He controlled his power carefully and merely pushed the others aside. Compared to him, those who had severed their cultivation and now ingested forbidden pills were far, far crueler. They didn't bat an eyelid as they crushed others to death. By severing their own cultivation, they had effectively severed their own lifespan. Although their clans and sects would definitely compensate them, there was simply no way they could maintain a positive mental state. Thus, some of them would purposefully kill in order to vent their frustration and anger on others. In any case, the Thousand Source True Fluid had already fallen to the foot of the mountain. It landed closest to a gray-robed elder, who laughed loudly and said, "This drop of Thousand Source True Fluid is mine. You people can wait for another day." He reached over to grab the Thousand Source True Fluid. He would immediately flee into the distance once he obtained it, and he definitely wouldn't linger around this area. The alchemical pills were only effective for a limited amount of time, and his current power could only be maintained for a maximum of half a month. Moreover, since this was a forbidden pill, it obviously had severely detrimental effects on one's body. Ingesting one every 100 years was the absolute limit. If 2 were taken within 100 years, that would be suicide. Xiao, a streak of light flashed over as quick as lightning. This was none other than the annihilating Dragon Star arrow. The gray-robed elder had no choice but to stop and block the attack. However, this arrow was extremely powerful, and the elder was instantly pushed to the side, causing him to deviate from the divine fluid. Damn it! The elder stomped his feet into the ground with overwhelming power to stabilize himself, and he reached toward the Thousand Source divine fluid again. However, this brief delay allowed several other elites to arrive. They all reached out to fight for the divine fluid. Chapter 1187. Obtaining the divine fluid from amidst an army of thousands. Chapter 1187. Obtaining the divine fluid from amidst an army of thousands. More and more powerful cultivators appeared, and they all unleashed their most powerful abilities. Only 8 of the people present had reached the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier, though Hu Feiyun wasn't participating in the battle. Theoretically speaking, these 7 people would be the most powerful individuals here. However, this was only in theory. Meanwhile, there were many more people who had severed their own cultivation. In fact, there were over 100 of them. Their power was no weaker than that of the 7 king tiers, and their battle prowess was also immensely impressive. This was in no small part due to the fact that they had been at the Sun-Moon tier before, which meant that they had already grasped more powerful regulations of heaven and earth. There was no need for all of them to team up, however, as just a group of 10 such cultivators would be enough to trouble Shin Juer, Shurongwa, and the other young king tiers. The young king tiers would have to wait until the effects of the forbidden pills wore off before they could counterattack and suppress these elderly cultivators. With these 100 or so people joining the battle, chaos instantly ensued. However, Shunjuer, Shurongwa, and the others still displayed their impressive might. Although everyone's power was similar, this didn't mean that everyone's battle prowess was also similar. In addition to power, one's battle prowess would also depend on the techniques that they practiced. King tiers were king tiers. Among those who possessed similar cultivation levels, the battle prowess of king tier prodigies was a level above everyone else. Apart from Wu Jie, who was slightly weaker, the other 5 king tiers were all in the thick of the action. They attacked each other and fought over the drop of thousand-source true fluid as they blasted everyone else aside. Beat it! An elder reached over to push Ling Han away. Power that was close to the sun-moon tier fluctuated over, and this was the strongest power that this mystery realm could contain. At least this was the case for outsiders. They would be targeted by the restriction if their power exceeded this level. As such, this level of power was almost invincible. You're already so old, yet you still speak in such an impolite manner. You truly deserve a beating. Ling Han humphed, retrieving his divine demon sword and unleashing the lightning sword technique. What? The elder let out a muffled groan as he was sent flying by Ling Han's sword strike. His expression changed drastically. That strike had been far too quick, and he had barely been able to see the trajectory of the sword light before he had been struck. Moreover, the destructive power of that strike was also incredible. It had ripped through his origin power defenses and cut deep into his flesh. Gasp! If they fought head-on, he would definitely be cut into pieces after 10 or so exchanges. Impossible. That strike was quick, yet it was still insanely powerful. How can these two qualities exist at the same time? This thought had barely left his mind when Ling Han had already charged past him. Pung, pung, pung. Ling Han unleashed several more strikes, and many more cultivators were sent flying into the distance. Beads of cold sweat dripped down the elder's forehead. He felt that he would never be able to understand this sword strike, no matter how many times he saw it in action. He was definitely no match for Ling Han, unless he grew much stronger, or unless they had a crushing advantage in numbers. If he faced Ling Han alone, he would lose in a very short amount of time. Ling Han cut through the crowd of fighting cultivators, and he became the 7th young king tier of this location. From the perspective of others, he could rank 6th among the 7 king tiers, as he was evidently stronger than Wu Jie. This was because Wu Jie didn't enjoy a significant advantage over the older generation of cultivators. Damn it! The cultivators who had been sent flying were enraged, and they all launched counterattacks at Ling Han as if in tacit understanding. All kinds of dazzling lights and divine patterns streaked through the air toward Ling Han. Ling Han laughed loudly and borrowed the power of their attacks to increase his speed. Pung! He was like a human cannonball, and he instantly sent the dozen or so people in front of him flying. He had the power of several elites behind him, and thus the force of this collision was absolutely devastating. Pung, 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 pung. The crowd separated like scattering flowers as everyone stumbled to the side. Ling Han was unscathed, and he continued to charge forward. The surrounding cultivators were all stunned. What kind of fighting technique is this? Are you a fucking human weapon? Could the situation have been any crazier? Ling Han had been struck by a barrage of attacks, yet he had actually taken advantage of their momentum to increase his speed and knock others aside. His defenses were downright freakish. Who could injure him? Ling Han had already charged into the core area of the battle. This was the battleground of He Tao, Shinjuer, and the others. They continued to fight over that drop of divine fluid, yet none of them was able to successfully obtain it. There was an endless collision of powers, and this caused the divine fluid to continuously jump through the air. Humph! Shinjuer and the 4 other king tiers were all extremely displeased upon seeing another competitor appear. They didn't hold back as they started launching attacks at Ling Han. Although they had already made an agreement to cooperate at the end and open a treasure storage together, they would still be competitors before that. It was just that they had a bottom line: they definitely wouldn't kill any of the other 6 king tiers. Ling Han laughed heartily and completely ignored the attacks of the other 5 king tiers. He extended his hand toward that drop of thousand source, true fluid. He had a freakish physique, so he could do as he pleased. Pung, 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 pung. Countless attacks roared toward Ling Han, yet he didn't even attempt to block them. The furious attacks tore his clothes to shreds and then left a few blood marks on his skin. Fuck! The king tiers attacked him together, yet they only left some blood marks on his skin. Everyone was transfixed in shock. Meanwhile, Ling Han took advantage of their hesitation to grab the drop of thousand source true fluid and place it into his black tower. Hand it over! The 5 king tiers shouted as they attacked him. Hurry up and hand it over. The older generation of elites outside the core area of battle also launched attacks at him. Attacks rained down on Ling Han, and it was as if the sky were about to collapse. It was a petrifying scene. Ling Han was too lazy to even block them, and he simply crossed his arms before his chest. The attacks crashed down, and the divine patterns that were intertwined within them radiated with a brilliant glow. These attacks were all near the level of the Sun-Moon tier, and even elites at the low extreme of the Sun-Moon tier would be horrified if they were to face such a violent barrage of attacks. They definitely wouldn't dare to face it head-on. However, Ling Han remained where he was and calmly allowed the attacks to hit him. Boom! The earth shook, and shock waves swept into the surroundings. Clouds of dust billowed into the air. Ling Han was sent flying, yet when he landed, everyone was shocked to discover that he had only received some minor, superficial wounds. Not a single one of his bones had been broken, and he definitely hadn't been smashed into a pulp. You guys want me to hand the divine fluid over? Then show me that you're powerful enough to take it. Ling Han laughed loudly and said, Come on, I don't mind playing around with you people. You're the target of so many elites, yet this is just a simple game to you. You're far too arrogant. However, they had to admit that his physique was indeed monstrous. Him being able to survive the barrage of attacks just then was proof. He had been hit by over 100 attacks, yet he had walked out of it as if nothing had happened. That being the case, who could still pose a threat to him? The 5 king tiers were the first to stop attacking Ling Han. The other cultivators gradually stopped attacking him as well. There was no point attacking him any further. It was impossible to snatch that drop of thousand source true fluid from him. Done! Ling Han asked with a beaming smile. He sat down where he stood. Why aren't you leaving? Someone asked in an interrogative tone. According to the standard convention, those who obtained a drop of thousand source true fluid would immediately leave. After all, it was far too dangerous to remain. If one remained, they would be ganged up on by others, and it would be impossible to withstand the endless waves of attacks. Moreover, those who could obtain a drop of thousand source true fluid were definitely very powerful. Once they left, there would effectively be one less powerful competitor. As such, this would also be beneficial to others. Leaving after obtaining a drop of divine fluid was the standard convention. Why must I leave? Ling Han asked with a smile. His physique was invincible, so he could naturally stay to fight for more thousand source true fluid. Anyhow, there was no rule mandating that one had to leave after obtaining a single drop of divine fluid. Chapter 1188. 3 drops. Chapter 1188. 3 drops. Everyone was enraged. This brat had already obtained a drop of thousand source true fluid, yet he still wanted to fight for a second drop. Ever since this yellow spring mystery realm had opened, only one person had ever obtained 2 drops of thousand-source true fluid at once. Yang Hao. Yang Hao had been a king tier among king tiers at that time, and he had suppressed all of the prodigies in his generation. Those of the old generation could only look up in awe as well. It was because of this that he was able to obtain 2 drops of thousand-source true fluid. However, could this brat compare to Yang Hao? What a joke! Prodigies like Yang Hao would only appear once every 1,000,000 years. When he reached the mountain river tier, people were certain that he would definitely reach the heavenly body tier. What other prodigy could compare to him? However, the cultivators genuinely had no clue how to deal with Ling Han's freakish physique. Although there were numerous people here, they all had their own agendas, and they were all here for their own benefits. How could they truly work together? However, if they were to battle one-on-one, who here apart from the 6 king tiers would be a match for Ling Han? Thus, the cultivators quickly suppressed their anger. They sat down to rest and meditate that they could recover to their peak condition. This way, they could compete for the 2nd drop of thousand-source true fluid. One day quickly passed by. Sun and moon crossed paths, and the 2nd drop of thousand-source true fluid started to form. It gradually grew larger and eventually rolled off the eagle beak under the force of gravity. Xiao! It fluttered with the wind as it drifted down the cliff's face. It's mine! Not only did the older generation of elites start to move, but those who had reached the consummate level of the mountain river tier also dashed over to try their luck. After all, thousand-source true fluid was incredibly valuable. For those who were stuck at the consummate level of the mountain river tier, ingesting a drop of thousand-source true fluid would perhaps help them open the door to the sun-moon tier. After reaching the sun-moon tier, their lifespan of 400,000 years would increase to 1,000,000 years. This was an astonishing increase. To say nothing of strength, just this increase in lifespan was worth risking their lives for. The surroundings instantly descended into chaos. Ling Han carefully picked a direction before explosively leaping forward. Pum! He soared into the sky, and those around him were all sent sprawling. He charged toward the 2nd drop of thousand-source true fluid. You dare! He had already obtained a drop of divine fluid, and thus his choice to stay and fight for a 2nd drop naturally made him the common enemy of the people. Countless attacks rushed toward him. Not only was he attacked by the elders who had severed their cultivation, but he was even attacked by some who were only at the consummate level of the mountain river tier. A cold glint flashed past Ling Han's eyes. He had held back and avoided killing people before, and by the looks of it, these people had become convinced that he was a soft-hearted pushover. Even consummate-level cultivators dared to attack him without fear and restraint. One had to realize that in the cultivation world, he who possessed a higher cultivation level was senior. Humph! Ling Han brandished his divine demon sword, causing divine patterns to materialize and murderous aura to soar into the sky. This was a weapon whose material had the potential to evolve into divine metal. Although it hadn't reached that level yet, its quality was still incredible. Shwa, shwa, shwa! Sword light flashed through the air, and severed limbs flew through the surroundings. Jets of blood sprayed into the sky. H. Han Lin, how ruthless of you! I'm a disciple of the majestic heaven sect. This person had lost a hand, and they were wild with fury as they shrieked at Ling Han. Ling Han had already dashed past that person. However, when he heard their angry scream, he specially turned around to charge back over. Humph! Did you hold back when you attacked me? Since you dared to provoke me, you should have been prepared to suffer my fury. His sword slashed down, and that person was instantly cut into 2, both his body and his divine sense annihilated. You guys want to obstruct me? No problem. However, use your bum and ponder whether you have the strength to block me. Ling Han said in a menacing voice. coupled with the dozens of corpses around him, his words seemed especially threatening and domineering. The other cultivators all frowned in anger. Use their bums to think. Was he comparing their brains to their bums? Was there really a need to degrade them like that? However, the ground was littered with fresh corpses, so who dared to protest? Respect was earned through battling and killing. After killing dozens of cultivators to demonstrate his strength, the others finally didn't dare to underestimate him any longer. He was also a young king tier. Moreover, he was more terrifying than Shenjuer and the 5 other king tiers combined because he possessed an invincible physique. At least, it was invincible in this mystery realm. Ling Han continued to barge toward the 1,000-source true fluid. Meanwhile, just like before, it was the other 5 king tiers who occupied the core area of the battle. They were fighting over the 1,000-source true fluid, though it wasn't as if the others didn't have a chance. If the 1,000-source true fluid were struck and sent flying into the distance, perhaps some lucky person who was standing there would be able to easily obtain it and then flee. "It's you again!" Shinjuer and the others all grimaced upon seeing Ling Han. "Heh, how are you all doing?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "How am I doing my A*S? It's only been a day, and we've all been standing here around each other. Is there any need to ask how we're doing? Go!" The 5 king tiers attacked Ling Han in unison. None of them was weaker than Ling Han. In fact, their power was even above that of Ling Han. However, anyone who unleashed power at the Sun Moon tier would be targeted by the restrictions of this mystery realm. Thus, Shenjuer and the others had to suppress their power such that it didn't cross the boundary to the Sun Moon tier. Ling Han unleashed his lightning sword technique, only attacking and not defending. He took full advantage of his freakish physique. No one could outlast someone who had terrifying offensive abilities and invincible defensive abilities. After battling for a while, Ling Han charged through their attacks and obtained the second drop of 1,000-source true fluid. Everyone's expression changed drastically. This brat was taking things too far. He had already obtained 2 drops of 1,000-source true fluid. Moreover, by the looks of it, he could still obtain the 3rd, the 4th. He had the ability to obtain all 10 drops. Even Yang Health King Tier of King Tiers had only managed to obtain 2 drops of 1,000-source true fluid. Ling Han was already on equal standing with Yang Hao at this moment. In fact, there was a significant chance that he would end up overtaking him. Was an even more terrifying prodigy going to appear? Everyone's expression darkened, and a few older generation cultivators gathered together to discuss something. Yang Hao had been able to obtain 2 drops of divine fluid, but hadn't been able to obtain 3. Why was this? Being able to obtain 2 drops proved that his battle prowess was definitely impressive. So, why hadn't he been able to obtain 3 drops? This was because Yang Hao had become the target of everyone after obtaining his 2nd drop of divine fluid. Regardless of how freakishly prodigious he was, he still couldn't endure becoming the enemy of everyone else. Right now, the more elderly cultivators were starting to suggest that everyone work together to attack Ling Han. Ling Han's physique was indeed invincible, but his power was not. Thus, they could trap him in some location and stop him from fighting for the divine fluid. However, this pertained the division of benefits. Those responsible for trapping Ling Han would clearly be forsaking their opportunity to fight for the divine fluid. As such, who was willing to take this role? The 3rd day rolled around, and another drop of divine fluid appeared. The surroundings descended into chaos again, and this was especially beneficial to Ling Han. Attacks streaked through the air, and the cultivators had no choice but to dodge and weave. However, Ling Han could ignore them and walk straight through them. Thus, he was able to obtain the 3rd drop of 1,000-source true fluid with ease. It's his 3rd drop. The others couldn't tolerate this anymore, and they formed a special alliance to target Ling Han. When the fourth drop of divine fluid appeared, half of the older generation cultivators turned their attention to Ling Han. In addition to them, 3 of the young king tiers also targeted Ling Han. They trapped Ling Han where he was, while the remaining cultivators fought over the fourth drop of thousand source true fluid. Chapter 1189. Hand over the divine fluid. Chapter 1189. Hand over the divine fluid. Ling Han was very strong, very, very strong. However, even he couldn't break through the encirclement that consisted of dozens of pseudo-sun-moon tier elites and 3 young king tiers. He was trapped all the way until someone managed to obtain the drop of thousand source true fluid. Only then did those trapping him retreat. When the 5th drop of divine fluid appeared, the other half of cultivators came over to trap him. Meanwhile, the half that had trapped him the previous day charged over to fight for the divine fluid. Ling Han was stunned. He had actually become the enemy of everyone. Fuck, you people are far too shameless. However, in a more distant location, those who were too weak to participate in the fights for the divine fluid all admired Ling Han immensely. He was just a single person, yet he was powerful enough to force all of the other elites to team up and target him. In fact, they had sent half of the cultivators to trap him. Moreover, even the young king tiers had joined the alliance. What did this say about Ling Han's strength? Even Yang Hao hadn't received such special treatment, had been forced to retreat after being attacked by everyone. Ling Han had already surpassed Yang Hao, at least in the mountain river tier. In fact, one could claim that he was the strongest mountain river tier cultivator in history. The 6th drop, 7th drop. The elites continued to rotate their roles, and Ling Han was confined to where he stood. Although they could only cause him minor wounds, the sheer number of cultivators meant that Ling Han was unable to move anywhere. How irritating. Why have you people suddenly become so united? Ling Han was extremely ticked off. However, the cultivators didn't give him a chance, and they continued to rotate in their roles. When the 10th drop of divine fluid appeared, however, those who were responsible for trapping him abandoned their responsibilities. This was because there would be no 11th drop of divine fluid. If they kept their eyes on Ling Han, they would lose this final opportunity to obtain a drop of divine fluid. Chaos descended once again. Ling Han laughed heartily. This was exactly what he wanted. He charged toward the divine fluid, and he was able to hack an older generation cultivator aside with each strike of his sword. If he came across a young king tier, he would simply charge through their attacks. After a period of intense battle, Ling Han successfully obtained a 4th drop of thousand source true fluid. He had created a new record. He, a single person, had obtained almost half of the available divine fluid. This was an absolute miracle. Perhaps this was a record that would never be broken. As long as this mystery realm remained, people would mention Ling Han's feat whenever they talked about thousand source true fluid. Anyhow, it was impossible to snatch the divine fluid from Ling Han, who could crack his defenses. Even the power of decrees was limited in this place. As such, Ling Han's defenses were truly invincible. Thus, the cultivators merely looked at him deeply before marching off into the distance. Meanwhile, many of them pondered whether they shouldn't become acquainted with him. He was a rising prodigy, and his accomplishments in the future definitely wouldn't be below those of Yang Hao. Brotherling, we'll meet at the promised location. Shen Juer, He Tao, and the others also left. King tiers were king tiers after all. Apart from Wu Jie, the other 5 king tiers had each obtained a drop of thousand source true fluid. This was a reflection of their strength. However, Wu Jie had only just reached the pinnacle level a short while ago, so his strength was far below that of the others. As such, he hadn't managed to obtain anything. Anyhow, the 6 king tiers combined had only managed to obtain 1 more drop of thousand source true fluid than Ling Han. Thus, They naturally paled in comparison to him. Ling Han nodded at them in reply. Them fighting over the divine fluid was a separate matter from them cooperating to open the treasure storage. Ling Han welcomed friendly competition as long as underhanded tactics weren't used. Han Lin. 8 people appeared, 7 of whom were very young. One of them was an Eldrin elite who had severed his own cultivation. He had ingested a forbidden pill at this moment, and thus his power was almost at the sun-moon tier. A formidable aura radiated from his body. In fact, this was already as a result of him suppressing his own power. Otherwise, his power would definitely reach the sun-moon tier. If that were the case, his battle prowess would undergo a qualitative change. Why did people say that those with a power of 9 stars couldn't battle against sun-moon tier elites? Why did they need to possess a power of 10 stars? This was because this 1-star difference signified a dramatic difference in strength. If one didn't reach 10 stars, they could only be called pseudo-sun moon tier elites. "You've done very well," the elder said, an arrogant expression on his face. "Who are you people? You make it seem as if we're familiar, and you're even speaking as if you're my senior. That's a little too shameless, don't you think?" "Young master is very satisfied with you," the elder continued. "Now you can hand the 3 drops of thousand source, true, fluid to me." "Oh, so they're people from the Gao faction." Ling Han finally understood the situation. No wonder they felt so good about themselves. They were the subordinates of Gao Huang. He couldn't help but chuckle and say, "Do you guys have brains? Why must I hand the divine fluid over to you?" The elder humphed and said, "Han Lin, don't think that you're invincible in this mystery realm. If I unleash my true might, your measly power won't be able to stop me." Gao Huang had only been making a casual remark when he said that he wanted Ling Han to obtain 3 drops of thousand source true fluid. In reality, he would have been satisfied even if Ling Han were only able to obtain a single drop. However, who knew that Ling Han was so freakish? He had actually managed to obtain 4 drops of divine fluid. Even the elder could barely believe this. The elder was called Shi Ming, and he was a senior member of the Gao faction. He had entered this Yellow Spring mystery realm several times, though he had never managed to obtain a drop of thousand source true fluid. If he were able to return with 3 drops this time, he would naturally have made a great contribution. He had no future to speak of, had already severed his own cultivation, but he still had many descendants. If he were able to make such a large contribution, they would probably be looked after well by the Gao faction. In fact, they would have an incredibly bright future in front of them. For the sake of his descendants, he had to force Ling Han to submit. Ling Han smiled faintly and asked, "Are you threatening me?" "This isn't a threat. This is the truth." Shi Ming humphed and said, "If I unleash my true might, my battle prowess will advance to the sun-moon tier. It's just that I might also be killed if I wield such power here." "Oh, are you saying that you're not afraid of death?" Ling Han asked. Shi Ming laughed loudly and said, "Who isn't afraid of death? However, I'm willing to fight to the death. But are you?" He had already placed all of his hopes in his descendants. Thus, he was willing to die in order to pave a smooth path for them. Ling Han sighed and said, "I've just realized that you're fairly pitiful. You've been a dog and a servant all your life, and you've never been able to live for yourself. Don't change the topic." Shi Ming pointed at Ling Han and said, "Immediately hand over 3 drops of divine fluid. I'll allow you to keep a drop for yourself. You're still young, and you have many more chances to enter this place. In fact, you can enter many other ancient sites. There's no need to lose your life here." Ling Han shook his head with a smile and said, "Since when did bandits become so understanding? However, it's a pity that you can't change your nature as a bandit no matter what you say." "Since you're so stubborn." Shi Ming took a deep breath as a resolute expression appeared on his face. He was going to unleash power at the Sun Moon tier to suppress Ling Han, even if this meant being targeted by the restrictions of this mystery realm. He was willing to die to achieve his aims. I'll send you on your way. Boom! Shi Ming unleashed an attack, and power at the Sun Moon tier surged into the surroundings. Over 100 intertwining divine patterns instantly materialized in the air. This was a qualitative change. Even those at the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier could only wield 99 divine patterns. Only those who had advanced to the Sun Moon tier could wield over 100 divine patterns. The only difference was that there was a qualitative difference between divine patterns at the Mountain River tier and divine patterns at the Sun Moon tier. Meanwhile, divine patterns at the pinnacle level of the Mountain River tier were identical in quality to those at the Sun Moon tier. The complexity and power of divine patterns were determined by the regulations of heaven and earth. The higher one's tier, the higher the quality of their divine patterns. Chapter 1190, Despicable Ginseng's Offer. Chapter 1190, Despicable Ginseng's Offer. Shi Ming unleashed his full battle prowess, not caring that he would be targeted by the restrictions of the mystery realm. He regained his might as an elite at the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier. In this mystery realm, this was definitely an invincible power. Pum! Ling Han was sent flying by Shi Ming's strike. He felt extreme discomfort, and it was as if his insides were churning. Although he possessed a power of 9 stars and was only a tad away from reaching 10 stars, this tiny distance was like an insurmountable gulf. A power of 9 stars still belonged to the Mountain River tier, while power of 10 stars had already advanced to the Sun Moon tier. As freakish as Ling Han was, he still couldn't make up for the gulf in power between the Mountain River tier and the Sun Moon tier. He was simply no match for Sun Moon tier elites. This time, he didn't have any lion seal to use. Anyhow, he wouldn't dare to use a lion seal even if he did still have one. The restriction here targeted anyone who possessed power at the Sun Moon tier, and he certainly didn't want to be targeted. In any case, it mattered little that Shi Ming possessed power at the Sun Moon tier. His power was only at the low extreme, and as such, the most it could do was cause Ling Han to spit some blood. If he wanted to truly threaten Ling Han, he would need power at the medium extreme of the Sun Moon tier. Ling Han crawled up as if nothing had happened. He then dusted himself off with a smile and said, "You really are a bit more powerful than before. However, that's still not enough to injure me." Fuck! Shi Ming was so shocked that his eyes almost popped out from his head. Ling Han had taken his full power attack, just like that. That was the attack of a Sun Moon tier elite. It should have been powerful enough to kill any Mountain River tier cultivator. However, why couldn't it deal with Ling Han? Freak. He's definitely a freak. Aya! Shi Ming wailed in agony. After launching a Sun Moon tier attack, he was immediately targeted by the restriction of this mystery realm. Poo, piu, piu. Blood exploded from all parts of his body, and he instantly became a bloody figure. However, the pain helped him come to his senses, and he glared at Ling Han with a venomous look. Killing intent oozed from his body. He was going to kill this prodigy. He was going to pave a smooth path for his descendants. Die. He was drenched in blood as he launched another attack at Ling Han. He combusted his blood essence to fight against the attacks of the restriction, and this allowed him to still have enough power to suppress Ling Han. Ling Han shook his head. Apart from himself, no one else knew just how powerful his physique was. Shi Ming wanted to kill him with power at the low extreme of the Sun Moon tier. It wasn't enough. Ling Han unsheathed his divine demon sword, and it radiated with a brilliant glow as he battled against Shi Ming. Pum, 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 pum. Shi Ming was able to send Ling Han flying with every attack. That he unleashed this was due to his crushing advantage in cultivation level. However, the most these attacks could do was cause Ling Han to vomit a few mouthfuls of blood. Meanwhile, Shi Ming's own situation was far direr. The attacks from the restriction continued to wound his internal organs, godly bones and meridians. Pa! During the 20th exchange, he threw a fist at Ling Han. However, his entire arm exploded into a cloud of blood and bone shards. The power of Sun Moon tier elites was far too powerful, however, and thus this cloud of blood and bone shards still possessed a devastating destructive ability. A few members of the Gao faction were standing nearby, and they were instantly smashed into bits by the cloud of blood and bones. Only one person managed to survive, with the others all being insta-killed. However, Shi Ming had already lost all ability to reason. There was only a single thought running through his mind at this moment, and that was to kill Ling Han. Thus, he attacked Ling Han without restraint, not caring that his body was already on the verge of collapse. Pa! His other arm also exploded, and he became an armless person. However, he still didn't stop, and he raised his legs to kick at Ling Han. Pa! It wasn't long before his legs also exploded into clouds of blood and bone. However, he exhaled a breath of air and sent his body crashing toward Ling Han. His expression was as if he wanted to drag Ling Han down with him. Ling Han almost felt a hint of sympathy for him. Should he pity or detest such a person? Pa! He didn't need to attack, and the restriction of the mystery realm ripped Shi Ming's body into pieces. However, his eyes were still fixed on Ling Han. He was going to launch one final attack. However, he never got around to doing so because his brain also exploded into a cloud of blood and gore. Those at the Sun Moon tier could already be referred to as elites. However, Shi Ming had died just like that. In fact, he didn't even have a full corpse. The sole remaining member of the Gao faction almost wet his pants in fright, and he trembled in terror as he turned around to flee. This place was far too dangerous. He was going to flee straight to the entrance, where he could wait for Venerable Trinity to reopen the mystery realm. He didn't want to stay in this place for 1 second longer. Ling Han shook his head as he sheathed his sword. He then walked toward Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun. He would feel some pleasure when he crushed profligate disciples. For example, he would definitely feel great when he eventually stomped on Gao Huang's face. However, his encounter with Shi Ming could only make him sigh with emotion. His mood also became a little heavy. There's no need to feel sympathetic toward such kinds of people, though there's also no need to hate them. Ling Han rid his mind of these thoughts. He then smiled at Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun and said, "Let's go." "Ling Han, you're so strong." Hu Feiyun was biting into a fruit, so her words were a little unclear. Her blood had been churning in excitement when she watched Ling Han charge in and out of the enemies. Her admiration for him was immense. Ling Han laughed loudly and replied, "Of course." His mood became a little better. The three of them walked for a while when Ling Han suddenly sensed danger. He instantly thrust his sword toward the ground. Pooh! Sword light shot into the earth, and a web of cracks instantly appeared on the ground. "Fuck your entire family. You almost skewered my A*S. A white shadow dashed out from the ground and shouted, "Eat your grandpa's ginseng foot!" Shwa! The white shadow instantly shot toward Ling Han. It was the despicable ginseng. He truly came and went like a shadow. He had planned to ambush Ling Han, yet, unfortunately for him, Ling Han had cast his divine sense to monitor the surroundings. Not only had he failed his ambush, but he had even been attacked by Ling Han first. Moreover, Ling Han had been extremely close to hitting him. Ling Han unleashed his fast technique on the old ginseng. "You're still 10,000 years too young to kill your ginseng grandpa," the old ginseng shouted in a strange voice. His reaction was extremely quick, and he transformed the power of regulations into sabers, spears, and arrows before shooting them toward Ling Han. "Didn't you say I was 800 years too young last time?" Ling Han asked with a smile. "Pei, It's because I've become stronger. The old ginseng weaved through sky and earth at an astonishing speed. Ling Han humphed and said, "Hurry up and jump into my bowl. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. You dare to threaten me? Watch how I stomp you to death." The old ginseng flared up in rage, and his attacks rained down even thicker and faster. Ling Han didn't hold back anymore. Boom! Terrifying flames burst from his body, and divine patterns intertwined in the air. "Phut! I hate fire the most," the old ginseng wailed. He instantly scampered dozens of meters back, finally stopping his attacks. He wore a fearful expression as he stared at the flames. Although he was quick, the might of ice and divine flame could still restrain him. "Despicable ginseng, why did you appear again?" Ling Han asked. The old ginseng plopped onto a stone and crossed his legs. His attitude seemed smug, and he said, "I want to give you an opportunity." "Pooh! Are you fucking kidding me?" Ling Han smiled and said, "Oh, what opportunity might this be? Perhaps you want to donate your body? Then hurry up and come to my bowl." The old ginseng instantly jumped up and shouted, "Pay, pay, pay! I'm not interested in men. Don't even think about taking my 8** guess." Ling Han shook his head. This despicable ginseng had grown up in this mystery realm. So how had he developed such a SH*TTY personality? Could scoundrels also be born like that? "I'll give you some divine fluid if you take me out of this mystery realm." The old ginseng made Ling Han an offer. Chapter 1191. 10 Ginseng Roots. Chapter 1191. 10 Ginseng Roots. "Oh." Ling Han was slightly surprised, and he asked, "Why do I have to take you out? You have your own legs, don't you? Not only that, but you're also as quick as the wind." "Foolish human! Don't you know that there are people standing guard outside? A few of them are incredibly powerful too. If I leave by myself, I'll definitely be captured and made into a stew," the old ginseng said. You actually know that there are powerful elites outside." Ling Han clapped his hands and said, "Oh, I see. You were already waiting by the entrance when the mystery realm opened. You had wanted to leave, yet you discovered that there were Heavenly Body Tier and Eternal River Tier elites standing guard outside. You became afraid. That being the case, it was very likely that this despicable ginseng had set his eyes on him since a long time ago. Although I'm excellent at fleeing, I'm still fairly fearful of those bastards outside." The old ginseng didn't mince his words and continued, "I know that you have a treasure on you, one that can hold living beings. Let me hide in it for a while. Once I get out, I'll reward you with supreme divine fluid." Ling Han gazed at the old ginseng, and he involuntarily recalled the sight of him drooling while he had been leering at the big breasts of Shinji. His expression darkened, and he said, "The supreme divine fluid that you speak of isn't your drool, right? Although that could indeed be classified as treasure fluid, it was still nowhere near the level of divine fluid." The old ginseng flushed red in embarrassment and coughed before saying, "I received the fortune of heaven and earth, and my entire body is full of treasures. Do you think anyone can receive my drool? This old sleazebag." The repayment for helping him escape this mystery realm was some of his saliva? Was he fucking trying to humiliate him? Ling Han started to bargain with him, saying, "Give me half of your body and I'll take you out." "Brat, you're far too greedy. You actually want to cut me in half?" The old ginseng jumped up and down in rage. "Eat my treasured ginseng foot. See how I stomp you to your senses." The human and ginseng started to fight again. However, they stopped after exchanging a few blows. "I'll give you 1 strand of my root tops," the old ginseng said. 100 strands. Ling Han made an exorbitant demand. "Fuck off. I only have 37 roots in total. There won't be enough even if I pluck all of them for you," the old ginseng shouted. "Then I'll settle for 37. Ling Han said in an understanding voice. The old ginseng shook his head and said, "In your dreams. 2 max." They continued to bargain. In the end, they settled on 10 roots. "That's right. What breed are you?" Ling Han asked with a smile. *ty brat, you dare to insult me. The old ginseng launched a kick at Ling Han. Ling Han blocked with his hand. He then nodded and said, "I can guess even if you don't tell me. You're either a perverted ginseng, or you're an unvirtuous ginseng. You're making me so mad." The old ginseng jumped around in rage, and then said, "Brat, make a Tao oath." A Tao oath was when someone made an oath to the great Tao of heaven and earth. There existed an intangible will of heaven, and if one didn't keep their Tao oath, they would be punished by heaven and earth. Going against a Tao oath was a massive taboo. No one dared to do this. Ling Han nodded, and then made a Tao oath. This was an oath to heaven and earth, so he couldn't escape his liability even if he disguised his identity. The old ginseng finally relaxed upon seeing this. He jumped onto Ling Han's shoulder and said, "Brat, you're fairly lucky. You managed to win the hearts of 2 beautiful girls." This old ginseng was becoming perverted again. Ling Han shook his head. This old ginseng came and went as he pleased, and he had even managed to discover his black tower. He had most likely observed him for a long time, and only appeared on the medicinal mountain upon approving his character. "Perverted ginseng, when did you achieve Tao? Also, why do you want to leave this place?" "I engulfed the essence of heaven and earth, and I obtained the vital energy of sun and moon." Ling Han hurriedly interrupted and said, "Stop, stop, stop! Stop bragging and cut to the chase." The old ginseng was extremely displeased. Why couldn't he brag for a while? He mumbled for a while before finally telling his tale. Several tens of thousands of years ago, he gained a blurry awareness. He had instinctively absorbed the vital energy of heaven and earth, and thus started to cultivate. However, he had only managed to grow arms and legs during the past several million or so years. This allowed him to escape from the ground and travel around the lands. However, this mystery realm was relatively small. Moreover, the more regulations that he mastered, the more that this mystery realm would target him and made him suffer from backlashes. As a result, he urgently wanted to escape. However, even though this mystery realm opened twice every 100 years, once for people to enter and once for people to leave, the outside was filled with elites. Thus, he didn't dare to leave lest he be made into a ginseng stew by the people outside. This time, however, he had no choice but to leave. He had a feeling that this was his last chance to leave. Even if he could survive the next 100 years, he would be erased and killed by this mystery realm. Ling Han slapped his thigh and said, "If I had known this earlier, I would have been more aggressive in my bargaining." "Haha, you're still 20,000 years too young to contend with your ginseng grandpa." There was a smug smile on the old ginseng's face. Ling Han chuckled upon hearing this. Fortunately for the old ginseng, Hunyo wasn't here. Otherwise, his smugness would probably lead to him being stuffed into a pot and cooked into a stew. The old ginseng shuddered and said, "Brat, can you wipe that creepy smile off your face? I'm getting goosebumps just looking at you." "How can you get goosebumps?" Hu Fei Yun asked curiously. The old ginseng shot an annoyed look at her and said, "Little girl, it's a figure of speech, understand? You don't look too young, so why are you still so stupid?" Ling Han shook his head and said, "Your mouth is so toxic. You're bound to suffer one day. Pei, your ginseng grandpa is transcendent above the 9 heavens and 10 lands. Once I leave this place, who can still capture me?" The old ginseng was brimming with confidence. Ling Han grinned and said, "I'll introduce you to someone in the future." He couldn't wait to see Hunyo trampling all over this old ginseng. There was no reason for this, but Ling Han instinctively believed that Hunyo could suppress this old ginseng. This old ginseng was extremely lively and he would brag and fight with Ling Han when there was no one around. He would occasionally tease Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun as well, though he would naturally end up being chased around and attacked by Ling Han. Thus, he couldn't get near Shui Yinyu or Hu Feiyun. If there were outsiders around, he would tunnel into the ground. No one here could discover him. Brat, you're going to that final treasure storage? The old ginseng became serious upon learning of Ling Han's target destination and said, "That's not a good place to be. I passed that area several times, and I felt apprehensive each time." "Oh, do you know anything about that place?" Although Ling Han possessed the Black Tower and was confident in protecting himself, the Black Tower wasn't all-powerful. It would be quite troublesome if he were to be trapped in that place. The old ginseng shook his head and said, "How would I know anything? That place is swirling with deathly aura, so I never attempted to near it." Ling Han pondered for a moment, but still decided to go. First of all, he had already promised the others that he would go. He couldn't go back on his promise. Second of all, he was extremely curious. After leaving the Eagle Mountain, the surrounding environment became desolate. There were scars left by battles everywhere, and the multitude of obliterated mountains revealed just how intense the battles in the past had been. That was a mountain range of the immortal realm, so just how sturdy were the mountains? However, they were completely crushed now. The person who had obliterated them was definitely supremely powerful. There were no demonic beasts, and there were no godly medicines. There was only the yellow spring that surged through the sky. Chapter 1192. Opening the Treasure Storage. Chapter 1192. Opening the Treasure Storage. There was almost no one here. Everyone knew that this was a desolate land, so who would waste their time coming here? A dark and eerie aura rose from the ground, reaching a height of around 6 meters. It continued to change into all shapes and forms, and it appeared especially uncanny. However, this aura wasn't dangerous. Ling Han had never heard about anyone dying from breathing in this aura. Is this a remnant from the great battle of the past? Ling Han said in speculation. Several more days passed, and a palace appeared before them. This palace was built at the foot of a mountain, and the origin of the yellow spring was none other than this mountain. The yellow spring flowed down from it and transformed into the river that crashed through the sky. "Why don't you two enter the Black Tower?" Ling Han said. He didn't want Shui Yinyu and Hu Feiyun to face any danger. Shui Yinyu nodded in understanding. From this point on, she couldn't help Ling Han any longer. Not only that, but she would even be a burden on him. Thus, it was better for her to enter the Black Tower and cultivate earnestly so that she could increase her strength. That way, she could strive to be of more help in the future. Meanwhile, Hu Feiyun was a bit reluctant to enter. She was an extremely curious person, and she was thoroughly interested in this place even though the eerie aura of the surroundings made her hair stand on ends. She didn't want to miss any of the excitement. After lots of encouragement and lies, they finally managed to convince Hu Feiyun to enter the Black Tower. "I want to enter too," the old ginseng said. His eyes dashed about in excitement. Ling Han knew that this ginseng was having perverted thoughts again. He wanted to tease the two women while Ling Han wasn't present. However, that was the Black Tower, and there was even a saint inside. "Sure." Ling Han nodded and said, "Stand still and don't move." He wrapped his divine sense around the old ginseng and then brought him into the Black Tower. If his divine sense was stronger than his targets, he wouldn't need to seek their agreement, could forcefully drag them into the Black Tower. However, the old ginseng was astonishingly quick, so Ling Han would have no way of wrapping his divine sense around him if he didn't stand still. "Fuck! What is this place? Also, what's with this tree? Why do I feel like I've met my ancient ancestor? Fuck! What's with this orb of light? It seems terrifying. Wah! Hurry up and let me out." The old ginseng was curious at first, but his curiosity quickly became astonishment, and his astonishment quickly became terror. He wailed in fright. Ling Han couldn't care less about him, and he strode toward the palace that rested at the foot of the mountain. This was the final stop of the Mystery Realm. He arrived at the entrance of the palace. The entrance was tightly shut, and there were already 5 people standing in front of it apart from Kwang Pei-shan. The other king tiers had all arrived. Brother Ling. The 5 people all nodded at him in greeting. They didn't seem jealous of him just because he had obtained 4 drops of 1,000 source true fluid. Perhaps they were, but they had hidden it deep within their hearts. King-tier prodigies like them all had a firm conviction that they were invincible. Why would they need to be jealous of others? Ling Han nodded and said, "You've all arrived fairly early." "Hee, we only arrived a short while ago," Shur-ong said with a chuckle. A hint of apprehension flashed across his eyes as he looked at Ling Han. In terms of battle prowess alone, he had a crushing advantage over Ling Han. However, if they were to battle to the death, Ling Han would definitely emerge victorious. The reason for this was simple. Ling Han's defense was far too terrifying, and it would be impossible for him to crack it. Such opponents frightened him. Junior sister Kwang still hasn't arrived yet. She probably came across some great opportunity on her way here, Wu Wentong said. Their king-tier strength meant that they were invincible in this mystery realm. Thus, there was no way that Kwang Pei-shan was late due to facing a powerful enemy. They sat down and started discussing Dao. There was nothing better for them to do anyway. As king-tiers, all 6 of them had reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. As such, they were supremely talented in the field of cultivation. They all gained a lot from their discussions. After waiting for 2 days, Kwang Pei-shan finally arrived. "Righto, let's begin." There were 14 indentations on a large door of the palace, and each one was just large enough to fit a hand. The 7 of them stood side by side, and they each placed their hands into 2 indentations. "Push when I count to 3, Hitao said. "Hum." The 6 other king tiers all nodded in acknowledgement. Right now, they naturally wouldn't argue about who was issuing the commands. 1, 2, 3. The 7 king tiers unleashed their full power as they pushed on the door. When their power reached 7 stars above the peak stage of the consummate level of the mountain river tier, the indentations below their hands lit up. 2, 4, 6, 8. When all 14 of the indentations lit up, there was a cracking sound, and the tightly shut door of the palace slowly started to open. However, the 7 king tiers all stepped back, cautious expressions on their faces. Before this potentially astonishing treasure storage, they became even more careful than before. They didn't let greed cloud their eyes and judgment. The palace had been pitch black before. However, when the door fully opened, the columns inside started to light up one after another. After a short while, the entire palace was brightly illuminated. Gasp! The 7 king tiers all gasped in surprise. This was because a corpse was sprawled 30 or so meters before them. This person had to have been extremely tall, and they would have measured at least 9 meters in height if they were upright. Their entire body was blue, and they were dressed in a damaged suit of armor. In fact, there were gaping wounds on their body, and even their bones could be seen. There were a few lines of words carved next to the corpse. "When the 7 stars align, 'tis the time my successor appears. Dark demons of the netherworld, kill them, kill them, kill them. The heaven is unjust, despicable, detestable, deplorable." Hitao pondered for a moment and said, "The 7 stars are clearly referring to us. We've all cultivated to the pinnacle level, and we had to work together to open the door to this palace. Also, my successor appears. Is this saying that one of us will receive his inheritance?" Shen Juer took a few steps forward, and her expression suddenly changed drastically. She hurriedly retreated to her original position and said, "This senior is far too powerful. I'm not able to near him at all. It was as if a murderous aura were about to rip me into shreds. Ling Han had been squatting down before, and he stood up at this moment and said, "The tiles in this palace are also incredibly sturdy. I used my divine sword on it, but I still couldn't leave a mark." One had to realize that the words on the floor had most likely been engraved by the blue-skinned elite before he had died. Moreover, he had probably done so using his fingers. There were no weapons in his hand, and his index finger was resting on the last character of the message. Ling Han hadn't been able to leave a mark using a divine sword, yet the blue-skinned elite had been able to engrave a message using his finger. The massive gulf between them couldn't be more evident. The 7 king tears walked around the corpse. Although this blue-skinned elite had died long ago, remnants of his might still lingered over his corpse. It was simply impossible for them to near him. Even though they were all prodigies who had reached the pinnacle level, they still appeared especially insignificant before such a mighty being. He was definitely an Eternal River tier elite. Although I can't fathom the cultivation of Venerable Trinity, this senior gives off a similar feeling to him. He's definitely far above the heavenly body tier. Then his inheritance is tremendously valuable. Shinjuer and the others were all moved upon realizing this. How incredible would it be if they were to receive the inheritance of an Eternal River tier elite? Although Venerable Trinity had also taken in 9 disciples, he would definitely withhold some of his inheritances. He would leave his most important inheritance until the end and only teach it to one of his disciples. His other disciples were destined to receive only part of his inheritance. However, the situation right now was different. This blue-skinned elite had died long ago, and thus the inheritance that he left was definitely complete. Who wouldn't be moved?